spark. Final warriors can't engage. No honor on the page. Pathetic in their fight. Numbering their plight. Empty words they speak. In battle truly weak. So say it, keep too loud and proud. Their cowardice in my shroud. No glory for their kind. Honor they'll never find. Soldiers' gear, never shed a single tear. Tackled only from afar, no spirit in their war. We stand strong and tall, hear our battle call. Against the cringe we fight, our honor shining bright. So say it, keep too loud and proud. Their cowardice in my shroud. No glory for their kind, honor they'll never find.
Hey, War Pugs. How's it going? So, we are here. I had to check out a couple of things before we got back to this, but we're back. We're back now for the All Guardsmen party. This is part 2 of the Penal Legion, okay? It has been a bit of time since we saw anything from our good friends Sarge, Twitch, Tink, Nubby, Amy, and Doc. And frankly, Fox Leader, you know he wouldn't be mad. You know he wouldn't be mad. Tyler, what's up, buddy? Yeah, the 6 Skillerfields. Refurbishment is a process that we all must achieve. And, yes, oh no shit, here we are. Guys, it's time. It's time to jump back into the All Guardsmen party. No real preamble here. Let's just jump in. Here we go. Last we were with the All Guardsmen party, they had just finished dealing with the mob boss. Yes.
The second commissariat
Michael.
was led by our 2 depressed cadets, who had the familiar look of people desperately hoping that whatever was going on wasn't their fault.
All right, Caden, you have a nice night, bud.
More importantly, it was also commanded by the Commandant, who, since Amy had apparently scheduled our meeting during some big distracting brass brief, had brought along a nice big audience of senior officers.
Yay.
For the good old public reaming that followed. Now, it didn't start as a reaming. Getting caught mid-slap fight with another commissar might have been a bit undignified, but was perfectly understandable to anyone who'd actually met our commissar. The point where the discussion escalated happened pretty quickly, though. Roughly 5 choked seconds after Amy identified herself as Cadet von Humperdinck, to be exact.
Yeah.
She didn't even get a chance to start lying about what happened. The expression on the Commandant's face just sort of congealed, and then started reddening as he looked between Amy and the grumpy old commissar, until he finally exploded into full-on screaming rage.
That's always a bad sign.
Like all properly epic reamings, this one had evidently been building up for a good long while. The gist was that Sourface did not run this camp, and the Commandant was well and truly done with his bullshit little power games.
Oh.
but the fine details went on at length.
Okay.
Once or twice the old bastard tried to interrupt with stuff about this being the right time and place, but the commandant wasn't having any of that.
Hooray.
And just kept on going, all while our drunk old commissar watched on with sort of vindictive glee. The rest of us were more focused on getting our shit together now that the collars were finally turned off.
That's good.
And figuring out how to talk our way out of this when the commandant got around to asking questions. For like the 16th time, our asses were saved by our former trainees. The ex-scribe and cleric had been thinking down exactly the same lines as Tink, but had the forethought to actually put on their scan-proof scarf thingies first. Then, when Tink beat them to the punch, they'd then been smart enough not to wait around and get noticed.
Oi.
And they were up on their feet, helping Amy collect everyone and providing someone who was not Sarge to handle the talking.
Yes.
The drunk old commissar's attention was seized by a dose of stim and the offer of a fresh bottle. We got his gaze focused on the general vicinity of Amy, who was actually trying to look like a grateful rescuee, and then a very edited version of the last several minutes was remembered to him.
Oh, okay.
We weren't sure how much really sank in, but the idea that he might have done something heroic definitely seemed to have been established. And
hooray.
He seemed nearly coherent by the time the ex-cleric unsubtly asked how much it would annoy Sourface if Amy were to become one of his cadets.
Oh.
Eventually, the raging commandant brought us all back to the present series of totally foreseeable, easily preventable, completely self-inflicted frack-ups.
Yeah.
On cue, Amy stepped forward again to give her report, and then surprised the shit out of us with this sudden spiel of high gothic in this weird sort of bossy nasal drawling accent. It honestly sounded nothing like her. Well, not the bossy part. More the baked-in tone of aristocratic arrogance.
There we go.
That and the lack of profanity. In any
Okay, that now I can't see it as being Amy.
case, whatever Amy had just said, at least half of the commissars present understood it, judging by the expression of dawning horror as they all looked from her to our nearly coherent commissar. To our amazement, the man actually sat up and then slurred something. In the best traditions of overly competent subordinates and evil royal advisors, the cleric translated an acceptance of Amy's life debt, as well as a request that the commandant allow him to take over her training. The commandant just stared, his eyes bugging out slightly and mouth hanging open, until the old commissar brought the silence. She's got nice tits.
Well, you gotta have your reasons.
Amy maintained her poker face and nodded in agreement with this sage wisdom. While everyone else in the audience, the word definitely qualified at this point, tried to figure out what to say after that, Commissar Sourface smugly pointed out that the old drunk already had his maximum of 2 cadets. The commandant, visibly relieved to have something else to occupy his attention, rounded the man with a bellow of, "Yes, 2, not 12. Tell me, can you count 12? Let's practice on those cadets behind you.
Oh!
1, 2, 3. Before the reaming could really get going again, we gave our commissar a firm poke. The man abruptly interrupted the raging commandant and, in something very near to complete sentences, announced that his current pupils were doing so well that they were ready to return to regular training rotation.
Yes.
The appallingly hopeful impressions that suddenly seized the 2 cadets' faces was something to see, as was the commandant's when Sourface interrupted yet again. Showing an absolute inability to take a hint, the vindictive bastard snidely pointed out that our commissar didn't even know what his cadets looked like, much less whether they were fit for duty.
Oh.
This time, the commandant actually paused to consider the inarguably valid point, which gave the two cadets time to solve the problem by running over to their chair-bound superior and desperately saluting him. Our commissar surveyed the sweating pair with vindictive glee, and then jabbed a finger at one of them. "Yeah, this one haven't got him with any more porno slates of feloned guardswomen since..." The commandant cleared his throat and
Okay.
asked if he meant Cadet Yuriev, and was informed that, "I called him Yiffy, 'cause the porno slates are the..." Before the blushing cadet in question loudly thanked his superior for his support and ran for the barracks.
Yes.
The other cadet, an expression of desperate optimism on his face, pointed out that the commissar had said both of them were ready, and got shot down with a "Shut up, Sniffy."
Wait a minute.
After a few seconds.
Wait a minute. Felonids, Rena. Felonids. Catgirls.
Croggled silence, the commandant just nodded at Amy, and then we seized our chance and made a tactical withdrawal under cover of Sourface's attempt to snap-graduate 11 of his cadets into full commissars, and the commandant's enraged response. A miserable-looking cadet, Sniffy, started to come with us, but Amy's cheerful, yes, cheerful insistence that she wouldn't have any trouble taking care of the commissar by herself cheered him up immensely, and
Hooray.
he buggered off. The old commissar was also cheered by Amy's declaration and insisted she ride up on the pallet with him where he could keep an eye on her. She handed him a fresh bottle instead, which he accepted as a decent substitute.
There we go.
After a short detour to the medical tents to commissarially requisition some supplies, we returned to our barracks for our traditional post-battle discuss what the hell just happened while Doc removes foreign objects from Sarge. Amy was introduced to the trainees without any hair-related acrimony. The commissar was tucked away into a corner with a fresh nightcap,
Hooray.
and a round of drinks was bought out while we caught our prodigal markswoman up on some events.
Hooray.
For her part, Amy didn't volunteer any details about her time in the commissariat, and nobody aside from Nubby was dumb enough to ask. When Nubby had been retrieved from his defenestration, and Doc pronounced Sarge sufficiently patched up for both of them to grab a
Battle Chicken, you are absolutely correct.
single drink, the subject of our upcoming infiltration was raised.
Okay.
With Amy, everything seemed almost too easy. We no longer needed to worry about the time limit on our collars,
Okay.
since she'd be able to go get a cadet data slate first thing in the morning and bring it inside with us. We didn't need to worry about those stupid room codes now that the big dumb mob boss had run off with either, since she'd just be able to grab the commissariat's copy of our transfer orders while she was there. Best of all, we now had a legitimate reason to go into the evidence storage facility
Oh.
to go get her stuff. Overall, the day was declared to have been a resounding strategic success, a term Sarge flinched at, even if nobody, not even our former trainees, believed any of it had been intentional.
Hey,
Even the old
there's an old adage in the military. If it fucks up but works, did it really fuck up?
The commissar was in high spirits, especially about Amy bunking in our barracks, and repeatedly insisted on being wheeled back into the conversation to regale his new cadet with slurred ramblings about his former glorious career. Our good mood lasted until Reveille. Or, to be more specific, 30 seconds after Reveille was supposed to happen. The lack of several dozen Vox units blaring the traditional distorted approximation of horns, played by equally distorted approximations of musicians, had Sarge sitting bolt upright and considerably more awake than their presence ever had. After patiently waiting an entire minute to see if it was just late, he balled the rest of us upright and a reconnaissance expedition was launched. The camp was quiet, primarily populated by the few other lifelong soldiers in the Legion nervously whispering to each other about the unexpected break-in routine. There was a small crowd gathering at the mess tent, but aside from that, the only visible activity was around the command building and the commissar's barracks. On closer inspection, this activity seemed to involve a lot of boxes being taken out to the shuttle pad, and the realization of the only likely explanation hit us all at once. The Penal Legion was being deployed. Amy was immediately sent in along with the still...
This is yet another military age-old tradition. If anything happens that is to your benefit, rest assured you're about to get screwed.
Snoring commissar for moral support, and returned a short time later with Cadet Snippy in tow. The morose cadet seemed to have reached a whole new level of despair, and mostly just whined about how everyone except him, Amy, and the two old commissars would be moving out. Amy and the trainees tried to prod him for more details, specifically details about the daily details if they'd still be happening. They weren't having much luck until Sarge stepped forward, pulled the commissar's data slate out of his chair, and handed it to the ex-scribe with directions to just transfer the little turd.
Right.
Sniffy sniffed and pointed out that he wasn't an idiot and had tried that on his first day. The commissar's data slate didn't have permissions to do anything more than a cadet's, for obvious reasons. Still, though, this show of good faith won some grudging cooperation from the cadet. His remaining reluctance evaporated completely when Sarge and the ex-PDF trooper pulled the young man aside and pointed out that Amy wasn't the sort of noble scion to forget a favor. And neither was her mother. A decidedly unsubtle hint that if Sniffy helped us with our little laundry run, he might get his longed-for transfer sooner.
Ooh.
Perhaps even today. Was enough to win him over completely. With the downright eager assistance of Cadet Sniffy, it was established that there wasn't an official schedule for work details, since the embarkation would be starting at that afternoon. Fortunately, there wasn't anything scheduled at all until then, so if we cleared it with the perimeter command...
Nicholas, you're not kidding. You're not kidding. No, just no.
We could presumably go whenever we wanted. He wasn't exactly clear why Amy, or the rest of us, wanted to go do laundry so bad, but he definitely wasn't someone to look a potential gift horse in the mouth.
Just remember, kids, clean socks are for clean living.
Amy requisitioned him as combination guide and commissar pallet pusher, and went off to get approval, a data slate, our transfer orders, and a damn gun.
Yay!
By the time Amy returned, sans Sniffy, the camp was in a quiet uproar as the rumor of imminent deployment spread like wildfire. Underoccupied legionnaires milled around, speculating about what sort of meat grinder awaited them, and trading gossip about the death of the mob boss and Commissar Sourface's very public fall from grace the previous night.
Sad,
Under the
really.
cover of all this, nobody even noticed us until our whole group had made it to the main gate, where a distracted pair of cadets waved us through without even checking Amy's proffered data slate.
Of course not.
Once in the laundry building, preparations began in earnest. Doc and most of the trainees went to do a quick scout of the freight bay to make sure we could still use it as our exit, and to catch the name of the next shift's commander if possible. The commissar, napping peacefully thanks to a preemptive sedative from Doc's limited supply,
Is this sedative called tequila?
Was parked in the corner with Tink, who was prepping a laundry cart with our uniforms and supplies, while the ex-scribe briefed Amy on the front door security procedures she'd be talking us through. The rest of us did a load of laundry. Or, at least we started to do a load, until our collars all suddenly activated at max power, and someone kicked in the door. Commissar Sourface practically radiated smugness as he strode into the room, one hand holding his data slate while the other kept his bolt pistol trained on Amy. He was alone, for a change, not that it seemed to bother him as he snidely reminded Amy that rule number 3 was no weapons and gestured at her to disarm. For her part, the markswoman stood stock still, glaring at the man with more hatred than any of us had ever seen before.
Oh!
Not that we were in any condition to see it right then either. After several seconds of futile stalling, Amy grudgingly parted with her newly acquired las pistol and chainsword, earning her a rage-inducing good girl from the smug commissar. Her data slate came next, though it was already showing an unauthorized user message on its screen.
Lovely.
And the whole lot was kicked out the door, which was kicked shut in turn. Surprisingly, he then holstered the pistol, swapping it for his damn data slate and gloatingly holding his finger over the execute button as he surveyed the room full of twitching guardsmen. He snidely reminded Amy that there was a reason the regulations forbade fraternizing with the rabble, not that he believed that's what we actually were. Then, to our collective amazement, the man started monologuing.
Don't do this. You will summon the ghost of Sigismund and he will punch you in the face.
It quickly became apparent that Sourface wasn't any more hinged than our commissar, at least judging by his rant about how Amy was going to be his ticket out of here, one way or another.
Okay.
And we were in position to judge, because inside the laundry hamper Tink had fallen into when his collar activated, the techie had finally managed to wrangle the anti-scan bag around his collar. It was sheer luck, more than anything else, that he wasn't spotted as he poked his head up to survey the situation. And even luckier that the exact 2 tools he needed were right beside him. While Amy desperately kept herself still and the commissar ranted about not-so-former inquisitorial agents thinking they were smarter than him, Tink grabbed our commissar's data slate, carefully set it for the lowest shock setting, and overrode the previous command. Down on the floor, we all gained a newfound appreciation for that lowest collar setting, and did our best to catch our breath without blowing our cover.
When I was in the military, we had to have taser training. And there was nothing quite like the good old fun of catching the good old shake, rattle, and roll. But, you see, this was the early 2000s when we had it. So, at first, you sit there and you have the official taser, and then you have a whole bunch of fucking idiots chasing each other around trying to shock each other. Because we're fucking morons. And it was funny. There's a reason why I am the way I am.
While Tink dug out the silenced auto pistol we'd appropriated last night and carefully took aim. The commissar was too wrapped up ranting at Amy about how he'd beaten the Inquisition at their own game to notice anything until the auto pistol hit him in the forehead.
Nice.
As in, literally, with a little metallic bonk, because we hadn't managed to...
Yes, RDX, I fought the Red Man. When I was doing visible search and seizure, we had to have pepper spray training too. And normal pepper spray that you get at the supermarket, that's shit's for bitches. We had something called OC spray, which oh my god, yeah, it will open up a whole new world for you.
To grab any ammo for the damn thing. Honestly, it was a mystery why we'd even brought it. In any case, even if Tink didn't have the same sort of lethal throwing arm as Sarge, and had actually been aiming for the data slate in the commissar's hand, the pistol's impact butt first into the man's forehead gave us the opening we needed. Actually, the impact itself barely even fazed the commissar. It was the second or so of confusion as he brought up the data slate and fruitlessly tried to find Tink's collar on its display that gave Amy enough time to lunge for the man's neck. Not that Amy's attack went any better than Tink's. The crazy...
While we're here, hold on a second. I gotta check something out. 1 second, guys. Just while we're holding on. 1 second. Let me see something here. Just looking. Okay. Alright, never mind. Just had to check something out. Let's go.
The old commissar was fast. Far faster than someone his age had any right to be in our opinions. Amy's lunge abruptly changed direction as the man spun out of the way,
Confidence
grabbed
chamber,
one of her
yeah.
reaching arms, and threw her across the room, accompanied by the audible pop of a dislocating shoulder joint.
Ooh!
However, this in turn gave Twitch enough time to act, and one of his homemade chem grenades smashed against the commissar's chest. Amazingly, even getting doused in whatever cocktail Twitch put in those things wasn't enough to do more than slow the crazy old bastard. The commissar reeled backwards, holding his breath and keeping his eyes closed until he was clear, and then abruptly turned and put his boot into the ex-scribe's face mid-tackle.
Gah!
Nubby's own lunge fared a bit better thanks to his shockproof augmetics, carrying him over the face-planted trainee and directly towards the commissar's face, only for the man to snatch him by the collar mid-air and hurl the little trooper across the room. It was then when he realized that Nubby was holding his precious data slate that the man started to panic. The commissar immediately reached for his pistol and chainsword, but didn't manage to draw either before Sarge's shoulder check hit him in much the same way a flyrant hits a dumb scout marine. The impact, as the pair hit the industrial-scale laundry units,
Avalon, stop torturing Savitar.
was quite literally bone-shattering, and while Sarge managed to stagger upright on his third attempt, the crazy old bastard stayed down for the count. By the time Doc's group returned a convenient minute later, we'd retrieved everyone from their assorted hard landings, disarmed the apparently unconscious commissar, and opened some windows before we all choked on weaponized cleaning agents. Our medic was not exactly thrilled to find himself dealing with yet another round of collar burns, not to mention the ex-scribe's badly broken nose,
Yeah.
Amy's dislocated shoulder, and Sarge's self-inflicted concussion. On the bright side, the scouting mission had gone fine, and our acquisition of Commissar Sourface's unrestricted control data slate opened up some interesting opportunities, assuming Tink could get it to work for him, that is.
Assuming.
The Commissar's data slate had locked itself the second it left his hands, and was now demanding both a biometric authorization and access code.
Okay.
Per usual, Tink claimed this was easy to bypass, or would be if he had all his stuff.
Right.
But lacking those, he'd just see what he could do with our Commissar's slate and a screwdriver.
Ha!
After several minutes of poking at the thing and ignoring helpful suggestions from Twitch and Nubby, he informed us that we had a choice. The techie was fairly sure that he could get around the access code by restarting the data slate, leaving just the biometric lock. Problem was, the data slate was still broadcasting its normal signal to our collars, and restarting would disable that.
Ooh, okay.
If he was wrong, we'd lose the signal, and since Amy's data slate was completely disabled, that'd leave us short.
Badly.
Sarge, Doc, and Twitch all listened to Tink's explanation and pondered the problem, while Amy flexed her relocated arm and stalked off to retrieve her gear. After several seconds, Sarge broke up the discussion and asked Tink just how sure Pretty Sure was, and whether anyone had checked if the slate's biometric lock was one of those fancy ones that could tell if the user was conscious or not. In the background, there was a high-pitched whine of a chainsword activating,
You got to remember one thing. You're in a penal legion. What is high tech?
Followed by a short, terrified scream, and then the sort of grisly rending sounds and screaming typically associated with Coronate Space Marines. Twitch just told everyone that he'd known the guy was faking being unconscious, and Tink suggested that it would probably be better to just leave the slate on. Nubby was dispatched to find a mop while the rest of us got back to work on the mission prep and laundry.
Right.
And Sarge did a mental wellness check on our hyperventilating markswoman, which is to say, he asked Amy if she was feeling better, got a yes, asked if she wanted to talk about it, got a no, and then shrugged and yelled at her to clean her uniform. Amy blushed.
Aww.
Once the load was done, our laundry hamper was prepped, and the commissar's remains had been scraped into a laundry hamper of its own.
Yay!
Sarge gave the order to move out. The trainees went off to the freight entrance with the bin full of fresh diced commissar and the man's data slate, with directions to keep our exit open and make sure nothing important got accidentally incinerated mid-mission. The rest of us...
Hold on a second. Sorry, I had to talk to the woman there for a second.
Still wearing our Penal Legion uniforms, except for Amy, formed up around our laundry trolley and the commissar's pallet, and went right in the front door.
Yay!
The lobby of the mundane evidence storage building wasn't particularly impressive, consisting primarily of drab little carpeted room with a few uncomfortable chairs and a recaf machine that had last been cleaned out sometime during the Horus Heresy.
That means if you use the recaf machine, it's got all the bean goodness and all the caked on extra caffeine that is built up over the years and years and years, which means it's good for you. It has vitamins and minerals.
Security checkpoint immediately past it was rather more impressive. What with all the automated gun emplacements and cybermastiff kennels lining the airlock-esque scan room leading into the building proper, the terminally bored inquisitional stormtrooper manning the checkpoint were equally impressive, at least until they registered our decidedly non-inquisitorial appearance and brought out the recaf mugs they'd stashed out of sight when the door opened.
Ha!
Rather than wait to be asked what in the Emperor's name we thought we were doing there, we rolled the cavalcade past the door sentries and into the scan room, where Amy stepped forward and announced that she was there to get her shit. The stormtrooper sergeant manning the little desk just inside the scan room eyeballed our spokeswoman in appropriately sergeant-y fashion, but dropped the act when she added, "and deliver some laundry."
Of course.
The sight of a bin of freshly cleaned uniforms, topped with a massive pile of still warm socks and underwear, caught the immediate attention of every stormtrooper present like, well, a load of clean socks. It's a soldier thing.
Yes.
Unfortunately,
What did I say? What did I say?
Fortunately for the grunts on duty, Amy wasn't willing to part with her laundry bribe. At least, not without a signed receipt. Specifically from the next shift's CO. These being orders from her vaunted superior, currently snoring on the pallet. Amy wasn't willing to budge on the issue, leaving the stormtrooper sergeant trapped between two equally valid maxims about letting sleeping commissars/officers lie. On cue, Sarge suggested leaving the laundry bribe somewhere secure, see the nearest security break room, while Amy's other request was dealt with, and a signature could be obtained on the way out. Sarge's pointed interjection earned him some eyeballing of his own, but for once his diplomacy training paid off.
Good.
A simple grunt of ex-stormtrooper, a gesture at all of us with a second grunt of unit, and a final grunt of bullshit inquisitorial power politics was enough to elevate our collective status from scum to poor bastards.
Yes, there we go.
Amy's own assurance that she was only wearing this dumb fucking hat because of political bullshit bore fruit as well, especially when she more formally requested entry to pick up the personal effects of one Amelia von Humperdinck before we all got deployed in a few hours.
You know, to be honest with you, if you're ever dealing with vets and you use language like that, political fucking bullshit, as a reason why something is going on, every single one of them is going to understand, okay? Every single one of them is going to understand exactly what you're talking about. And you don't really need to go anything further than that.
Interestingly, all the goodwill our blatant bribery earned us was overshadowed by the stormtroopers' response upon hearing Amy's name. The sergeant did a double take, then buzzed someone on his desk's Vox unit, before abruptly getting up and leaving through the door behind his desk.
Oh boy.
The stormtroopers on door duty just shrugged when we looked at them. After a short wait, during which Nubby managed to exchange a few pairs of socks for a round of hot drinks,
there you go.
The sergeant returned, accompanied by something so surprising that lesser men would have spat their recalf. A stormtrooper Rupert. Not the Rupert, of course, rather the exact sort of painfully keen and woefully inexperienced junior officer that doomed more honest guardsmen than all the traitor Marine legions combined. But
not another one of these assholes.
In a stormtrooper uniform. We all stared in shock. I mean, logically, we knew that stormtroopers had junior officers just like everyone else, but we'd always assumed they just started at captain or something. Seeing a stormtrooper with lieutenant tabs was just so wrong.
Yeah.
And the experience was not helped by the way he boggled at Amy like a recruit that had just been issued his first porno slate.
Right.
After a small prod from his sergeant, the stormtrooper lieutenant stepped forward and ascertained that Amy was indeed here for her stuff. And yes, it was urgent, because we are all deploying, and yes, Amy was really one of those von Humperdinks. The obvious firmly stated, the lieutenant retreated through the door along with the rather put-upon sergeant, only to reappear at the room's observation window and press his face up against the decidedly two-way glass. Nubby and Tink snickered as a large, foggy patch grew around the Storm Rupert's face, but fell silent when Amy reminded them who here had a chainsword. After several awkward minutes, the lieutenant disappeared from the window, and the stormtrooper sergeant returned, while a dozen servo skulls emerged from the wall ports and flitted around, presumably doing scanny stuff.
Of course, scanning stuff.
The stormtrooper sergeant quietly informed Amy that there was a bit of paperwork issue, but not to worry because they'd gotten her the good scribe.
Okay.
Said good scribe turned out to be a wizened old man in an augmetic wheelchair, unfortunately accompanied by the lieutenant. The jury was still out on whether the little tit was a ladder climber trying to score points with the family of a Lord General, or if he just had a thing for women in slightly blood-stained commissariat uniforms.
Either way, I can understand.
But whatever the reason, he was practically bending over backwards to make Amy happy. And this included volunteering a squad of stormtroopers to replace her retinue of penal legionnaires.
Mm-hmm.
On cue, Sarge volunteered to take our bin of laundry down to the guard room, along with the lieutenant's orders, and before long a whole squad of neckerchief sporting stormtroopers returned.
Yay.
Ready to escort and go for the facility's honored guests. The question of whether the lieutenant knew the appearance of his own men well enough to spot the swap was sidestepped when Amy blithely responded to the facility's no weapons rule by handing over her gore-covered chainsword and asking the lieutenant to personally take care of cleaning it for her. With the Storm Rupert out of the way,
There's always one like this. There's always one like this. I had a junior officer that I had to deal with, and I was on a co-ed ship, and there was this one person in my division who, if she had not been in the military, she could have been a model, and that wasn't just like the 3 months deployment opinion. That was a regular opinion. And he, quite simply put, was in absolute love with her, and it was annoyingly obvious to everyone. But the good thing about her was she understood this, and she used it to her advantage. She got us out of doing so much pointless crap, it was great.
The scribe assigned to us proved every bit as good as the sergeant had promised. He waved away Amy's sob story about her orders being mislaid and the time-critical nature of things given our imminent deployment to some horrible meat grinder, assuring her it wouldn't be a problem at all. In a surprisingly short time, he'd managed to pull up the room number for her gear, produced and filled out a dozen or so arcane requisition forms, and led the way out to the final security checkpoint between us and the facility proper. The second checkpoint hadn't been on the interrogator's plan, but that was understandable given it looked like it had been set up within the last few days. It wasn't much, just a single stormtrooper with a clipboard and a senior-looking scribe sitting at a desk covered with dormant servo skulls. We watched as our scribe slowly rolled forward and a sort of bureaucratic arm wrestling match began, with a lot of arguing about the difference between a release order and a disposal order, and why our request didn't violate some sort of freeze. For his part, the stormtrooper eyed us and casually asked why we were all wearing scarves. There was a brief moment of panic during which Sarge mentally ran through all the vague excuses we'd come up with, before finally shrugging and just raising the edge of his scarf to expose the discipline collar and announcing that we were wearing them because our Inquisitor was a massive asshole. The stormtrooper...
That will do it.
winced in sympathy, but then frowned and pointed out that he only had authorization to let through active HQ troopers, and he would need to verify our credentials. Sarge began to proffer his doctored ID card, hoping like hell that Tink had done as good a job on them as he'd claimed, but the stormtrooper waved him away and asked the pair of arguing scribes whether the psyker had come back from the bathroom yet.
Okay.
Fortunately,
Wait a minute,
the answer
what?
to that question was no, or more precisely, a sarcastic eye roll and a gesture at the general psycherlessness of the area. The stormtrooper muttered something and leaned over the desk's intercom and was rewarded with a pained voice telling him, yeah, but which massive asshole?
Nicholas, I am not the hospitaler. The wife is the hospitaler. That's, yeah, our understanding is our Inquisitor is a massive asshole. Done. Okay. You don't need to explain anymore. As far as I go, I'm the commissar.
To our collective relief, Sarge managed to not blurt Rogue Inquisitor Oak, but his decision to stand there silently panicking wasn't that much of an improvement. Fortunately, before any of us decided to try our hands at bullshitting past the psyker, our scribe helpfully suggested that if we could describe our Inquisitor, they could help us remember their name. Seizing the opportunity, all of us began rattling a list of the most generic descriptors possible, from paranoid bastard who doesn't tell his subordinates anything to self-important jackass who thinks everyone else is too stupid to breathe, and with a brief diversion into tells your mom you got sent to a penal legion. All of these were accepted with the
Amy.
blank stares of people waiting for you to finish stating the obvious, until Nubby suggested big stupid hat, and all three of them abruptly nodded, while the indisposed psyker swore at us for wasting his time and hung up.
There you go.
As the stormtrooper waved us through the door, he suggested that next time we start with the Inquisitor who's already here doing the pre-trial inventory on the Oak case. As infiltrations of top-secret inquisitorial facilities went, it was safe to say that we'd achieved the title of most half-assed. Honestly, we'd been grilled harder by stingy quartermasters, and Tau ones at that, but we weren't going to look a gift critter in the orifice. At least, not without a good pair of gloves. That said, we did still try to pry some information out of the scribe as he and the servo skull led us through the massive grid of corridors, but there was something about the place that seemed to discourage conversation.
Okay.
The walls just sort of drank in sound, making it hard to do more than nod along as the scribe nattered about how the recent servitor recall had made such a mess of things.
Yes.
In fact, according to the scribe, the facility was so short on manpower they'd been trying to get the Penal Legion to assign a few details to help inside as well as outside, but they hadn't been able to get the security clearance.
Of course.
Doc
They're
broke
a
in
penal legion.
and asked whether Amy's assigned penal detachment could have come in with her under her scrutiny, and the rest of us groaned at the realization that we probably could have just walked in without any of the stupid disguise or laundry stuff. At least the helpful old scribe was able to authorize the return of Amy's legionnaires, actually printing out a little form from an augmetic in his chair and handing it to Amy with a cheerful suggestion that she just take it to the guards on the freight exit instead of bothering the main security office.
Yeah, just go.
The door our guide skull led us to was a little smaller and lower security than most of the ones we'd seen. It was only the 3 stormtroopers with a cargo pallet that had set it apart. They seemed surprised to see us, boggling slightly at the sight of the snoring commissar, but straightened up when the scribe asked them what they were doing. After a short, awkward pause, one of them explained that they had a disposal order for the room and handed over a data slate. The scribe looked at it for a few seconds, announced he saw the problem, and promised to get it all sorted out.
Thank you.
He instructed the trio to come with him and began rolling off down the hallway, only to sheepishly roll back and open the door for us when Tink called after him. None of us had really known what to expect inside an inquisitorial evidence storeroom, but the reality was worse than we ever could have imagined. There were boxes, shelves, filing cabinets, and bins, all packed together more densely than any functionally sane human would want. But up above them was something terrible.
Oh?
Rows upon rows of metal racks reached all the way to the ceiling. Every centimeter of them festooned with bulging, opaque plastic wafers, each one containing a single vacuum-sealed item. Our entire arsenal, not to mention our tools, personal effects, several reams of parking tickets, and what looked to be several dozen empty beer bottles,
Hey, Micah.
had been clamshelled. The scribe handed Amy a battered data wand, hastily explaining the litanies of identification and deactivation, and stressing the importance of not removing or breaking the seal on any item that had not been deactivated first.
Okay.
With a friendly direction towards the nearest supply closet where cutting implements and first aid kits could be found, he rolled off. Tink grabbed the wand and hesitantly poked the little electronic seal on one of the corners. A hologram of an MRE appeared, along with a brief description, ID code, access log, and a little menu which Tink carefully navigated. The rest of us watched with growing impatience as the techie confirmed that he was sure he wanted to access the item, that he had read and understood the legal ramifications of accessing it, that he wanted to remove the item, that he read and understood the legal ramifications of removing it, and that he didn't want to review all those documents again.
Okay.
Twitch summed up the general mood with a series of dire curses on all bureaucrats. By the time Tink had the first few randomly selected items deactivated, and a pair of scissors had been fetched, broken, and abandoned in favor of Sarge's augmetic hand, it was obvious that this was going to take far longer than we had time for.
Nice.
Everyone but Tink and the old commissar, who'd been wedged under the racks at the far wall, began searching the racks and boxes for the real necessities. The room's small floor space was ankle-deep in vacuum-sealed junk when Nubby, having climbed through the racks to the back of the room, triumphantly chucked out a distinctly lasgun-shaped package.
Ooh.
Not just any lasgun, mind you, an oversized, blocky-looking, totally not techno-heretical lasgun.
Oh, he's finally got his stuff back.
The realization that Oak had included our gear from the occurrence border boosted the mood massively.
Yay!
And Tink began excitedly badgering Nubby to try and find if Spot 3.0 had been included too.
Oh, God.
Sarge broke in to remind them guns, ammo, and comm beads first.
Right.
And informed the rest of us that there wasn't time for everyone to sit around here. He, Amy, and Twitch would go off and scout for Oak's locker as soon as they were armed, and would return once it had been located to get their collars off and plan the switch. Doc would stay behind with Nubby and Tink to supervise the search for Oak's boxes and make sure the old commissar didn't wake up and cause trouble. As soon as Amy had changed into our last stormtrooper uniform, 3 weapons and the grenade insisted on having had all been extracted, and 2 comm beads had been found, the scouting team set off.
Yay!
Tink immediately redirected Nubby to find his personal stuff first, ignoring Doc's objections, because everything would be so much faster once he'd found his data slate.
Course.
Doc had barely even started grumpily going through the stacks of boxes when Tink extracted said slate and triumphantly plugged it into the data slate Amy had left with him. Amy's data slate, now elevated to the full authority of a commissar, not only supplied the IDs of Oak's boxes, which were in the far corner from where Doc had been searching, but finally unlocked those damn collars.
Yay!
The medic, feeling relieved but about as useful and appreciated as a Catechin commissar, decided that it was his cue to go do something more useful and headed off with his Penal Legion Assistance Authorization form to go get some more hands.
Nicholas, no, Primarchs are Primarchs. Primaris are Primaris. There's a difference.
With the annoying voice of reason out of the way, Tink and Nubby extracted the techie's plasma gun, and the unpackaging process became significantly faster.
Yay!
Rather foul-smelling. Admittedly, this completely violated all those directions the scribe had given us, but when the first one didn't trigger any alarms, Tink had declared it all a bunch of horse shit. It wasn't until after a light started flashing above the door that it occurred to either of the pair to check whether the room had a fire detector. But fortunately, it appeared to just be some sort of minor warning, which quickly shut itself off as the room's air circulation automatically activated. Unfortunately, the old commissar was less forgiving, coughing and grumbling in a distinctly non-tranked, not to mention exceedingly annoying fashion. After the third outburst, Tink announced that enough was enough, especially now that we'd gotten out of the collars, and directed Nubby to dig the old geezer out and take him somewhere less distracting, like one of the servitor storage rooms just down the corner.
Okay.
Nubby began to argue about being ordered around, but decided a little walkabout would be nice. Anything to get him out of the cramped little fume-filled room faster, really. A fair distance away, the scouting team was making some sort of progress. The duplicated ID cards were working to get them through the security doors at every junction, if a bit slower than things had been with the guide skull, and there were enough other skull-less stormtroopers walking around that they didn't really stand out. The problem was that while they had the ID number for Oak's room, which Sarge had memorized using a marker in his forearm, there wasn't any sort of directory, or even organization at all as far as Sarge and Amy could tell. Twitch insisted there was a pattern, though, one which he was on the edge of understanding.
God, Twitch.
If they would just let him study the problem.
His answer is going to be orcs. We all know this. His answer will be orcs. I mean, I'm not sure what the deal is, but we all know this.
Fully aware that Twitch had also said this about his breakfast cereal on multiple occasions, but lacking any better ideas, Sergeant Amy fell into step behind the demo trooper. Several minutes of back and forth, random wandering, and an awkward number of references to Sarge's forearm later,
No, Tony.
Twitch led the trio to a junction door with a terminally bored stormtrooper sitting in front of it. The stormtrooper didn't look up from the data slate he was holding as they approached, just boredly announcing that the junction's card readers were still broken and they should just detour around it. Before anyone could stop him, Twitch triumphantly poked a finger at the man, accusing him of being one of them, The stormtrooper looked up in surprise, did a double take at Sarge, and hastily shoved the slate into his pocket and came to a very embarrassed attention. Sarge shrugged in his best "I've got other shit to deal with" manner as the man muttered about only watching it for the battle scenes, and dragged Twitch out before he could make things any weirder. At Twitch's insistence, the scout patrol continued around the grid to the other side of the junction, turning up 2 more terminally bored stormtroopers before arriving at the final connected corridor where a pair of far more professional-looking stormtroopers blocked the way.
Okay.
Before anyone could think to stop him, the demo trooper walked up to the pair and asked if folks' shit was through there. He got a silent nod. Twitch asked if Inquisitor Big Hat was still there, and got a snort from the second trooper to go along with another silent nod. Twitch turned to Sarge and Amy with the triumphant finger guns, and then raised the question of what to do next. Sarge turned, trying to avoid faceplate contact with the 2 other guards, while poking his comm-bead in an attempt to raise Tink. After a few seconds of frustrating silence, he pulled the headset off, checked its indicators, which were all green, and started checking the other channels to see if he could hear anything on any of them. He stopped on the main stormtrooper band, listening to the calming chatter of patrol check-ins, and then shrugged and announced that Tink's comm-bead must be on the fritz. He began to suggest that we just get on with things as planned, when the door abruptly opened to reveal one of those creepy flying cherub servitors.
Oh God,
One of the
not
guards
these damn
announced that
things.
the Inquisitor was ready for us, and motioned for us to follow the creepy thing.
Ugh.
Tink and Amy stared in shock, but Sarge
It's one of the horrible things about 40K that even though I know it's there, I just can't get used to it. The idea of cherubs, they drive me crazy.
just nodded and motioned for the pair to follow him into the hallway. As it turned out, Oak's case did not have a room. It had the entire damned hall, both sides, and the pretrial inventory was in full swing. The hall was littered with pallets, boxes, stormtroopers of both the half-assed and rod-assed varieties,
Nice.
and at least a dozen scribes with data wands and slates moving between the rooms. The only thing absent were the guide skulls, having all been replaced by horrible flying cyber babies with inquisitorial icons stapled to them. Twitch quietly pointed out that anyone creepy enough to use cherub servitors should immediately be considered a heretic.
Yes.
Amy nodded in fervent agreement, and Sarge suggested that this really was not the time or place for that sort of discussion.
But
The cherub
why not?
led them to the largest door in the hall, a void-shielded high-security job with wards all over it. In front of the door was a harassed-looking man in a big dumb hat, waving a servitor control wand around and berating a random scribe. The Inquisitor, because there's no way he wasn't one, looked up in vague surprise as the group approached and waved the scribe away. Sarge, lacking any better ideas, saluted and then stood there, while Twitch and Amy silently watched and tried not to panic. The Inquisitor stared at Sarge for a second, and then waved his wand at the big door and ordered the 3 to follow him in. Inside the room, more a vault really, things were a lot less busy. There were a few elderly scribes off at a table on the side, along with a far younger scribe watching them. In the middle of the room, another young scribe, as well as a pair of elderly inquisitorial savant types and a trio of cherubs, fussed over a collection of clamshelled items and 3 familiar-looking empty boxes. In the far corner, a final young scribe sat muttering into a large Vox unit. Once the door was closed, the Inquisitor's demeanor immediately changed. He gruffly demanded Sarge report on what he'd found in the Von Humperdinck girls' vault. Back at said vault, Doc returned with Penal Legion helpers in tow. The stormtroopers working the freight bay had objected to him bringing in the trainees, but only because they'd been doing a great job of hauling stuff to the incinerator, and none of the troopers were keen on going back to doing it themselves. They'd bowed in the face of Doc's little printed form, though, and reluctantly allowed their helpers to head inside, along with several empty pallets and one laundry hamper full of fresh minced commissar. Bringing the group through the facility hadn't been a particular problem either, except for the part right at the end where Doc encountered Nubby trying to jam the sleeping old commissar into the tiny supply closet across the hall. Doc sent the trainees in to start helping Tink and went off to supervise Nubby's drunk commissar storage project.
There we go.
The cretinous little trooper whined that he'd checked every door he had access to, and the small supply closet was the only one even remotely acceptable. Doc pointed out that even if Nubby did manage to fit the commissar into it, the massive pile of office supplies he'd emptied out of it were a bit of a giveaway.
Yes.
Not to mention what would happen if anyone else needed to come get an easily broken pair of scissors. Nubby insisted that the other rooms he checked were actually worse, for some unspecified reason, but grudgingly grabbed the commissar's pallet and followed Doc down the hall to recheck those servitor storage and maintenance rooms. A few minutes later, Tink looked up from where he'd been supervising the extraction of Oak's boxes as Doc and Nubby returned and started shoveling freshly opened weapons, explosives, and MREs into the commissar's lap in an attempt to make space in the decidedly crowded little room. Tink was not happy with the return of this distraction, especially when Doc and Nubby couldn't really explain what was wrong with all the other rooms, just waving their hands and going on about how they'd checked and the rooms were unacceptable. The trainees butted in, pointing out that having him there wasn't really that much of an inconvenience, especially now that the ventilation was on full blast. But the techie insisted that it would ruin his nice, efficient process.
Okay.
Tink ordered the trainees to finish opening the items he'd already deactivated. He refused to leave his plasma gun with them, on the grounds that they'd probably break it, and then led Doc, Nubby, and the commissar pallet out into the hallway.
The commissar pallet.
The argument continued in the hallway for a moment, with both Nubby and Doc insisting that the only other remotely acceptable option was the little supply closet. Tink agreeing about the stupidity of the little closet, but still trying to ascertain what exactly was so damn wrong with his previous drunk commissar storage suggestions, finally yelled at Nubby and Doc to just show him, and grabbed at the commissar's pallet. A short walk brought the trio back to the door of the servitor storage bay, where Nubby rolled his eyes, jimmied the door, looked in, and made a little aha gesture. That was it. We couldn't shove him in here because he's all full up with naked dead guys. Tink surveyed the room with its tight rows of servitor berths inexplicably filled up with what looked like naked stormtroopers and a few scribes. After a few seconds of pondering, Tink pointed out that there was still plenty of room if they just shoved them all up in a pile against the far wall. Doc explained he'd already thought of that, and the problem was that only a few of them were actually dead. Wouldn't do to have them wake up and start asking questions about why people were shoving commissars in there with them. Also, Nubby added, it would be super unhygienic and a lot of work. Tink nodded in reluctant agreement with their sound logic and began to turn the pallet back around, only to abruptly stop part way, nearly sliding its snoring cargo off, and ask what was wrong with the other room. Doc and Nubby both looked at each other, obviously wanting to explain, until Nubby finally made a little apathetic shrugging gesture. He walked up to the door labeled Servitor Maintenance and Control Shrine 4 and knocked on it. Tink watched, slightly nonplussed, as an annoyed-looking man in robes opened the door and firmly stated that no means no. Not even if they asked, pretty please, or promised he wouldn't wake up, not to mention throw up. Ha! Doc immediately apologized and began offering tips on cleaning bodily fluids out of clothing, but stopped as the man made a little gesture and touched the glowing crystals on the Orant necklace that he wore. Tink peeked behind the psyker, surveying the impressive little cogitator array that had been wired into the building's main control and communication systems. He paused for a second.
Tink. Tink is either brilliant or I just want to throw him through a wood chipper sometimes.
Looking from the cogitator to the psyker
to the closed servitor bay, and then back to Doc and Nubby. Tink took a deep breath and pointed at the servitor bay. Okay, so we can't put the commissar in that one because there's a bunch of stripped stormtroopers already hidden there.
Uh-huh.
Doc and Nubby both nodded, while the psyker rolled his eyes and made a get-along-with-it gesture. And we can't put him in this one because this guy's already using it for his secret inquisitorial mission. More nods and eye-rolling.
Right.
And that supply closet was way too small, unless I make it bigger, that is. Tink raised his plasma gun, and both Doc and Nubby nodded at this novel, out-of-the-box solution. The psyker winced and touched his crystals again, and all three guardsmen deflated as they soon realized there were probably a lot of reasons why cutting holes in the wall with a Xenotech plasma weapon was a bad idea.
Yes.
Tink paused, double-checking that incongruous thought, and then sighed. You know, if I had a throne for every time we blundered into another inquisitorial team mid-mission, I'd only have 2. Which isn't a lot, but it's weird that it's happened twice. Doc laughed. Nubby laughed. The psyker blinked. Tink shot the psyker. Of course, now the problem...
It just dropped that.
problem was that, as Nubby put it, there's dead psyker juice everywhere.
Oh, no.
Tink nodded in resigned agreement, admitting that it really wasn't the sort of place to linger in. You know, in case they caught dead psycheritis or something.
Yes.
Down on the floor, Doc finished putting a dressing on the definitely dead psyker's chest wound and blinked a few times. As Tink and Nubby wheeled the commissar out, Doc jogged after them, grabbed one of the pulse carbines off the pallet, and shot the psyker again, in the head this time, and then dragged the techie back in to take a look at the cogitator setup. Nubby remained in the hallway with the commissar, insisting he had a family history of dead psycheritis.
Uh-huh.
In a room full of not dead psychers, Sarge delivered an exceedingly precise report of the contents of Amy's vault. To wit, parking tickets, guns, explosives, beer bottles, and more parking tickets. After nearly a minute of this, the Inquisitor held up a hand and clarified that he wanted to know what had happened and why Sarge was here. Sarge winced at the feedback in his comm-bead, both from the irate Inquisitor and the poorly disguised psyker muttering in the corner, then reached up and turned the stupid thing off, ignoring the Inquisitor's raised eyebrow. Sarge truthfully reported that Cadet Commissar von Humperdinck arrived to collect her stuff, and they'd, come here.
Yeah.
Because orders.
Orders.
Amy and Twitch shared a look of growing alarm, but the Inquisitor only sighed and asked Sarge why he wasn't wearing a psi shield. The answer, because we weren't issued any, did not seem to please the man. He glared at Sarge, which didn't really have much effect given the faceplate. The inquisitorial glowering was interrupted by a shrill beep from under Sarge's scarf, prompting further demands as to why he was wearing a scarf, and why said scarf was beeping, and where his psi shield was.
Right.
Sarge, still standing at a firm attention, got as far as, because, before the Inquisitor held up a hand and declared that he really did not care. In an exasperated tone, depressingly familiar to us from our previous missions, he directed Sarge to turn around, go back to Amy's vault, and stay there until the interrogator shows up, as had been outlined in the mission briefing.
Yep.
And then to go get a damned psi shield. Sarge, Amy, and Tink, thanking the sweet, merciful Emperor, saluted as the Inquisitor strode past them to reopen the door. Those thanks came to an abrupt halt as the door opened to reveal 3 familiar-looking stormtroopers.
Oh, God.
One of them with their hand raised to knock. The Inquisitor figured out what had happened far more quickly than anyone else, which didn't really help him much since Sarge, Twitch, and Amy didn't waste any time at all on such silliness. They just opened fire. 2 fully automatic pulse carbines and a double tap from Amy's rifle hit the Inquisitor, and then kept going as the man vanished with a distinctive crack of a displacer field.
There we go.
The 3 pseudo-stormtroopers behind the man did not have displacer fields, or time to dodge, for that matter. Unfortunately, this abrupt opening didn't account for the dozen or 2 other stormtroopers present, and even more unfortunately, the Inquisitor stuck his landing. A booming voice, infused with psychic will, ordered the 3 guardsmen to drop their weapons. Sarge, along with half the stormtroopers present, abruptly dropped their guns, as did Twitch, along with the grenade he'd just primed.
Oh,
A
shit.
desperate kick caught the falling munition, propelling it off the far wall and out of sight down the hall, roughly in the direction which the Inquisitor's voice had come from.
Yay.
Amy did not drop her weapon, because she'd already let go of it as she ran for the door's control panel, slamming the massive metal vault shut on a muffled crump and an anguished, "My leg!"
Yay.
Sarge and Twitch recaptured their weapons from their slings, while Amy mashed every single alarm and lock button on the panel.
There we go.
And asked Sarge just what the hell we were supposed to do now. Fortunately for the big, tired non-com, the answer was obvious.
Oh, really?
Because right about then, the 2 savants got over their shock and started screaming at their psychers to kill us.
Okay.
Actually, what the savants were yelling was a bunch of gibberish. Throne washes, talarns stuff.
What?
But the intent was pretty clear, as the 3 young scribes all sat bolt upright and turned to glare at us. The fact that they were psychers was also pretty clear, what with the nimbus of warpy energy forming around the one in the corner,
This is always a dead giveaway.
and the one at the table levitating up into the air.
This is also a dead
The real
giveaway.
clincher, though, was when the one over by the actual scribes abruptly turned into a demonic horror, the likes of which man was not meant to see.
Yay!
A towering, flickering mass of mouths and all-seeing eyes.
Perfect. Just the ancient horror we need at the time when we most need it.
The sort of monstrosity that could not be fought, only fled in a futile attempt to postpone the inevitable grisly end.
Yeah.
We shot at it anyway, though.
Yeah, of
because
course.
What else were we supposed to do? Whatever the psyker thought was going to happen, it wasn't 3 guardsmen panic-firing Xenotech plasma weapons in an enclosed area. When Sarge and Twitch ran out of ammo, all that was left of the psyker, not to mention the chair, table, half a shelving unit, and one of the hypnotized scribe's arms, was a smoldering stain on the vault floor.
There we go.
The 2 remaining psychers and their savant handlers all stared in utter shock, which was finally broken as Amy realized she still had a few shots left and promptly shot one of the savants.
There we go.
The remaining old man drew a needle pistol and leapt for cover, screaming more command phrases and gesturing with the data wand in his free hand. Sarge and Twitch both ducked as all 3 cherub servitors swarmed them, prodding at their faces and hands with miniature shock mauls while screeching and laughing in a far more disturbing way than the faux demon had managed.
Attack babies? We're at attack babies.
Sarge, cursing whatever had possessed him to come down here without his full kit, or at least a damned sidearm, tried to swat away the cherubs with his gun's butt while Twitch desperately tried to reload. He expanded that cursing
Keep Tink away from these things.
to include his decision to leave the damn collar on,
He's already got Spot 4.0. We don't need kids to play with Spot.
as the device in question suddenly progressed from beeps to warning shocks. Twitch added his own swears as his collar kicked in too, and he dropped his reload. Realizing she was the only one with a functional weapon present, Amy fell back into cover and lined up a shot on one of the cherubs, only to miss entirely as an invisible force wrenched her pulse rifle upwards. The markswoman, having just gotten her damn gun back and being none too keen on losing it again, tightened her grip on the bucking weapon. The Telekine psyker grunted and pulled harder until the pulse rifle finally rose over the top of the shelves, with an irate Amy dangling under it, loudly promising to shoot him in his stupid psyker face the second he let go.
Nice.
Sarge missed the magical levitating markswoman, at first because he was a little busy trying to fend off the cherubs, and then because his mind abruptly went blank.
Nice.
Across the room, the psyker by the Vox unit let out a groan of distress as several decades of literally guard-issue battle damage weighed down on his psyche, followed by a sharp electric shock to the neck. Sarge flinched and swore at his damn collar and then blinked as he registered the thankfully still empty gun he had pointed at Twitch's head. Any introspection that might have happened after coming this close to fucking up was postponed as one of the cherubs whacked him right in the faceplate with its mini maul. Sarge swore yet again, dropped his weapon
Yeah, attack babies, let's go.
onto its sling, and just grabbed the annoying little shit out of the air by a decoratively flapping wing, and swung it into one of its companions in a spray of feathers and servitor lubricant. Twitch, having finally succeeded in reloading, turned to take out the last cherub, only for his mind to go blank as well. Sarge, being gratifyingly quick on the uptake for a change, managed to grab the mind-puppeted demo trooper's weapon and yank the barrel upwards just in time. Twitch responded by repeatedly attempting to shank him with a sharpened fork, but didn't manage to penetrate the armor before his collar activated again and the psyker released him with a pained yelp. A good 3 meters above all this, Amy's death grip on her weapon carried her over the top of one of the shelving units, as well as the rather surprised savant using it as cover. Rather than wait for the elderly man to shoot her, like so much skeet, the markswoman twisted her body around and planted both feet against the side of a heavy-looking box and kicked off as hard as she could. The box, proving even heavier than it looked, barely shifted. The shelving unit, on the other hand... The savant let out a little screech of terror and sprinted along the aisle, throwing himself to the ground as the shelves finally slammed into their neighbor, pushing it over as well, and leaving him in a small gap full of falling clamshell casings.
Yay!
Amy surveyed the carnage as a third
Now you get to be surrounded by bureaucracy.
set of shelves began to teeter and found herself drifting off into a sort of peaceful doze. She didn't even realize she'd let go of her weapon until the strap caught her in the armpit, abruptly jerking her attention back to the present. Amy twisted around to glare at the telepathic psyker by the Vox unit, and after a brief survey of the available options, grabbed her stormtrooper helmet and hucked it at him. Twitch put down the remaining cherub just as soon as he'd convinced Sarge it was really him, and could he have his gun back now, pretty please? He started to shift left down the aisle while Sarge reloaded his own weapon and moved right, and drew up to the end of the unit right as the badly shaken savant flung himself around the corner, ready to flank the two men his psyker and cherubs had tied down. Twitch had made a sound somewhere between a scream and a yelp and flinched backwards as bits of savant skull shrapnel pinged off his faceplate.
Ooh.
At the other end of the aisle, Sarge ignored the weird sounds behind him as he spotted the glowing telepath psyker seated at the Vox unit in the far corner of the room. His carefully aimed shot missed as a ballistic helmet whacked the young man in the face, dropping him to the floor, swearing some more, especially as the collar shocked him again. The non-com sprinted down the aisle, confirmed the kill, and turned to try to get a shot at the remaining psyker. The telekine, a girl even younger than Fumbles, who insisted he was 23, abruptly realized that shit had gone truly south, and released a psychic shockwave that blew Sarge, Twitch, the scribes, and several shelves backwards. Amy was also hit by the blast, but true to her word, the second the markswoman's rifle was released from its psychic grip, she turned, drew a bead on the psyker midair, and dropped the girl with a solid center mass shot.
There we go.
Having spared rather less attention for her landing, not to mention the psychic shockwave, Amy swore as she bounced off two fallen shelving units, caught her leg on one of them, and found herself hanging upside down, staring at the terrified and confused scribes. One of them raised their hand like a kid in school and asked what was going on. In accordance with the laws of narrative causality, at precisely the moment the Inquisitor had said, "Until the interrogator shows up,"
The
a
interrogator
sallow-skinned
shows
young
up.
man and his two companions asked Nubby just what he was doing, standing in a hallway with a pallet full of unconscious commissar and odd-looking energy weapons.
Uh-huh.
Corporal Nubby Nubs, inquisitorial stormtrooper, saluted and proudly told the pale man with the psyker staff that he was keeping watch while his mates Doc and Tink checked out the psyker closet. The interrogator groaned and motioned at one of his retainers to inspect the room. Doc and Tink looked up from the cogitator unit as the door opened, framing a dark, lithe blur sprinting towards them. The medic reacted first, fumbling for his carbine, only for a hand to yank it out of his grasp and pull him forwards into what felt like a power hammer blow to the chest.
Oof.
Tink got to watch as Doc got kicked past him with enough force to break his weapon strap, and then his own weapon was yanked forwards, dragging him out of his seat face first and into the plasma gun's butt. A slightly nasal feminine voice complained, "He got himself shot in the damn face by these idiots. I think this one with the fancy gun might be a frackin' officer."
Nice.
Doc and Tink tried. They really did. Despite the broken ribs, Doc managed to get back up and launch a tackle at the body-suited woman, who, to be fair, wasn't even looking at him, only for her to slap him in the face hard enough to shatter his faceplate and leave the stunned medic in a heap on the floor. Tink made a grab for his gun while she was busy and got smashed in the face again with its butt for his trouble. Outside, the interrogator casually reminded the woman not to kill anyone, while he focused on psychically examining inquisitorial stormtrooper Nubs.
Oh, God.
The interrogator's
His mind is not a good place to be.
other retainer, a tall, lean man in a comically fancy coat and feathered hat, flipped up Nubby's visor to compare it against his security badge, and immediately regretted his decision. In a tone of horrified fascination, he pointed out that either the HQ stormtroopers were really scraping the bottom of the barrel, or the Ordos Xenos had started doing diversity hires. The interrogator frowned at this observation, while Nubby happily explained that he'd never been no versity, but was great at scraping things. The fancy aristo sneered and moved on to examining the snoring commissar, companionably pointing out that at least the interrogator didn't have to dirty his mind on that wreck of humanity. The interrogator shuddered and shook his head as the short trooper excavated one of his nostrils, examined his findings, and ate them.
Ugh.
After a brief, disgusted pause, he told his minions to shut up and go check on the Von Humperdinck vault. The squad of penal trainees didn't even look up as the door opened, being far too busy looking in literally any other direction. The aristo surveyed the scene for a few seconds before closing the door again and asking whether anyone would miss a unit of penal legionnaires if they spontaneously disappeared. The interrogator grunted in psychic effort, and the man hurriedly closed the door again. After a few seconds of silent probing, he declared that the legionnaires had been officially approved by someone or other, so they'd have to disappear the records too. The two men began debating whether it would be easier to kill, incapacitate, or just mind fog the legionnaires while they investigated the vault for anything oak-related. In the dead psyker closet, Tink and Doc had decided staying down was the better part of valor, especially since the woman had gotten tired of re-breaking Tink's nose with the plasma gun and was now holding it trained on the pair. Both guardsmen weighed their severely limited options, and lacking anything better, settled in to wait and see what happened next.
Okay.
That turned out to be the distant crump of a grenade, followed by several runes flashing red on the fancy cogitator setup. The woman stared in confusion at the mysterious blinking lights. Doc and Tink, having spent enough time poking at the thing to know that it was hooked up to the building's alarm system, decided the time had come for one last try.
Okay.
Tink leapt at the woman while Doc went for the cogitator. Realizing what was going on fairly quickly, she whipped the plasma gun towards Doc and pulled the trigger, and then stared in consternation as the gun emitted a short blue beam instead of a ball of plasma. Responding in the standard Imperial fashion for a warrior beset by unexpected weapon malfunctions, she raised her hand and gave the gun a good smack.
There you go.
Also responding in the standard Imperial fashion, the plasma gun vented a blast of superheated gas directly into her face. Tink's
Standard.
tackle hit the woman roughly half a second later, his first successful hit of the fight, and while he didn't do more than stagger her, he did manage to get both hands on his beloved plasma gun.
Yes.
The blind leg sweep she responded with hit his shins with considerably more force, as well as an unpleasant cracking sound.
Ooh.
Doc ignored the fight going on behind him in favor of desperately searching for the cogitator for some sort of approve button. Deciding it either had to be the yellow check mark or the green circle, he simply mashed both of them, and was rewarded with the sound of every vox in the building simultaneously blaring the fire, weapons discharge, and emergency lockdown alarms.
Glorious.
Out in the main hall, the distant grenade blast interrupted the interrogator and his minion. Both men paused to listen as their comm beads erupted into confused chatter, until this was interrupted in turn by the deafening blast of the facility's alarms.
Yay!
The interrogator swore, tightening his mental control on the short stormtrooper, and the room full of penal legionnaires, the elderly commissar, not being under psychic compulsion or adequately tranked anymore, jerked awake, looked around in vague confusion, and spotted a pale little tit with an inquisitorial rosette standing right next to the pallet with his eyes closed. With the malicious grin of someone who's always wanted to do this, he hefted his empty bottle and smashed it into the man's skull. Sadly, the commissar didn't have quite the same level of strength as, say, Sarge, so the interrogator didn't have his head caved in, but he did drop to the ground with a little yelp of pain. Needless to say, the interrogator did not take this kindly. A concentrated blast of psychic pain left the old commissar squealing and flailing in his chair, much to the surprise of the no longer mind-controlled Nubby next to him. With the honed survival instincts of a true cretin, Nubby responded to the complex tactical situation by screaming, kicking the downed interrogator in the stomach, grabbing one of the weapons falling off the commissar's lap, and diving for cover behind the man's chair. The aristocrat, viewing the whole situation with growing alarm, drew a comically small needle pistol and asked his superior if he needed assistance. The interrogator instructed him to do something anatomically improbable, which he seemed to take as an order to start flanking Nubby's position. Neither Nubby nor the interrogator waited for the flanking maneuver. The interrogator staggered to his feet, gesturing at Nubby in appropriately psychery fashion, only to screech in surprise as the little trooper lunged out of cover, brandishing a silenced auto pistol. Abandoning his psychic attack, the man scrambled around the pallet, barely ahead of a series of bangs, desperately trying to keep the bulk of writhing commissar between him and his assailant, and shouting warnings and
Well, he is on a pallet jack. That's always a good sign. Thank you, Avenil. Welcome to the commissar's, bud.
instructions to the aristo. For his part, the dapper man picked his way through the detritus of half-packed crates and pointed out that Nubby's gun hadn't actually been loaded. A slightly panicked voice from the far side of the commissar informed him that it was totally, definitely, 100% loaded and was just silenced.
Definitely. Totally 1,000% loaded. It is beyond dispute at this point, my guys. It is My God, Nubby Nubs.
Stowe asked why he'd been shouting bang then, and was rewarded with the little trooper poking out his auto pistol and yelling whip instead.
Whip?
The interrogator sighed in embarrassment and made another, uninterrupted, psychic gesture. A short distance away, a very angry woman with plasma burns on her face stopped trying to dislodge the flailing, screaming Tink from the malfunctioning plasma gun and just dropped both of them on the floor. Doc, knowing exactly what was coming next, scrambled away from the cogitator and tried to hide behind one of the servitor maintenance stations, only for a vice-like grip to close on his ankle and yank him out with enough force to fling the medic against the far wall.
Ow.
Her follow-up attack was interrupted as Tink switched the homemade fire selector on his plasma gun from cut to maximal and shot her in the back. Amazingly, the woman actually managed to spin in place and parry Tink's shot with her hand.
What?
While whatever mixture of augmetics training and magical bullshit that powered the woman's melee abilities was enough to deflect bullets, an overcharged ball of plasma capable of melting holes through tank armor was a bit of a tall order.
Yes.
Her hand didn't so much knock the plasma ball aside as splash it, wreathing her whole arm in blue flame, scorching through her body glove and reducing her hand to a fused, smoldering mass. Doc, seeing an opportunity but having no illusions about the woman's ability to beat his ass literally one-handed, scrambled past the screaming, swearing, burning woman and dove for the corner where his pulse carbine had landed at the start of the fight. Displaying far more tactical sense than usual for an inquisitorial agent, instead of chasing the medic, the woman started sprinting for the door. Tink, lying squarely in her path, brandished his plasma gun, realized it was obviously still recharging, and desperately tried to drag himself out of her way. Barely dodging the kick, the woman aimed at his head as she passed. Out in the hallway, Commissar Kelly swore as the ice pick of psychic pain jammed into his brain, pulsed with, upon reflection, not that much more discomfort than his more or less permanent hangover. Wasn't pleasant, mind you, but really it was a bit much to call it incapacitating. With an effort of will, the elderly commissar brought his eyes and a decent portion of his mind into focus and leaned forward to rummage in the pile of weapons in his lap. Next to his chair, the interrogator grunted with effort as Nubby marched out of cover. The grimy little trooper handed the unloaded auto pistol into the interrogator's waiting hand, while the commissar jammed his decidedly loaded las pistol into the interrogator's waiting face. The aristocratic inquisitorial agent, having successfully navigated the battle without getting shot at, and very proud of that fact, screamed in surprise as his superior's head detonated in a spray of flaming skull fragments and meaty bits. There was a...
It's always a wondrous thing when that happens. Thank you, Avenel.
Brief pause as
I'm planning on getting back to him, so...
the abruptly changed combat situation, and a confused Nubby picked up the fallen auto pistol and tried to jam it into the corpse's nerveless hand. Then, the commissar spotted him. The barrage of las pistol fire had more in the way of enthusiasm than accuracy. But it was enough to convince the aristo that it was time to take some cover. A panicked scramble left him crouched behind one of the half-empty boxes littering the hall, trying to draw a bead on the furiously cursing commissar, but flinching back with every poorly aimed las shot.
Not as big as it is now.
A little behind him, the door to Amy's vault slid open, and the confused face of a penal legionnaire poked out, jerked back, and then leaned back out again. This time accompanied by 4 more faces as well as 5 las guns. After a few seconds of watching, and one uncomfortably close miss in their direction, the former PDF trooper cleared his throat and asked what was going on here. The aristo blinked, laughed nervously, and immediately held up his hands. On the opposite side of the commissar, a smoldering curse flew out of the dead psyker closet, screaming for someone to throw her a weapon so she could kill these frack heads. Grinning in sudden relief, the aristo continued his upward motion, smoothly rising to his feet and tossing his as-yet unfired needle pistol towards his companion. 4 of the 5 las guns pointed at the man started moving, tracking the arc of the thrown pistol, which landed in the woman's remaining hand at roughly the same time as the better part of 12 las shots hit her in the torso. The aristo stared slack-jawed as his companion crumpled to the floor, where a bolt of plasma and burst of pulse fire from the closet doorway reduced what was left to a smoking, steaming wreck. He turned back to the doorway, full of penal legionaries, directing the majority of his attention to the former PDF trooper, who still had him covered, and tried to think of something really persuasive to say.
Be a good idea to try.
Behind him, the commissar finished reloading, took careful aim, and shot him in the head, too. Down on the floor, Nubby gave up his attempts to hand over his auto pistol to the dead interrogator, looking around at the carnage and announcing he was not it for telling Sarge. As it turned out, Tink was it, since he was the one who finally got the comm beads working. The techie's broken shins had been splinted, and he'd been given stim from Doc's recently recovered field aid kit, which was enough to get him propped upright at the dead psyker's cogitator. What really got Tink moving, though, was the sight of a trainee unpacking Spot 3.0, complete with Grok's skull disguise and little cartoon Demonthrope kill marker etched next to the one of the bonked Eldar. Rather than sit and figure out the cogitator's functions like a sane person, Tink had, giggling, ripped out several data feeds and hooked both the cogitator and inquisitorial facilities' security systems directly into his techno-heretical Xenos toy.
Alcius, the clones are actually armed and armored about the same, to be quite honest with you. Their the Star Wars blaster, I think, is an inferior weapon compared to the lasgun. And it's mainly due to the way the lasgun actually is fired and its ammo capacity. Their armor for blasters is decent, but against anything other than blasters, it's pretty much ineffectual. Training wise, clones would be comparable to Cadians, I believe, while stormtroopers will be comparable to a PDF trooper.
The mayhem was instantaneous. There were more alarms, of course. After so long aboard the occurrence border, they barely registered anymore. But that was nothing compared to the deafening babble of every comm channel in the facility rebooting into full, unjammed, and uncyclered functionality.
Great.
This included the private channel used by the other Inquisition team, as it turned out, which, combined with the gunfire, explosions, and assorted security alerts coming from Oak's vault, was enough to throw pretty much the entire facility into confused chaos. Our comm channel, through the techno-magic of live kernel patching, was rerouted through Spot, the Wonder Drone. The fact that Sarge was actually glad to hear Tink's voice spoke volumes.
Oh.
The overall tactical situation was a mess. Sarge, Amy, and Twitch, aided by the scribes they'd rescued, had managed to hold their position in Oak's primary vault. The big vault door and its inbuilt void shield had held for a while, but it wasn't long before someone on the outside managed to bypass the door's controls, only to find a giant pile of clamshelled junk, overturned shelving units, random boxes, and the odd psyker corpse blocking their way.
Just the odd psyker
Combined
corpse.
with the firing slits manned, or womaned, given it was Amy doing most of the work, by us and the more enthusiastic scribes, the hostiles hadn't managed to make any real progress before the arrival of the facility's actual security forces distracted them. Said hostiles had coordinated a defense involving both mundane and psyker assets, vastly aided by their control of the security systems and the lack of functional comm channels, at least until Tink pulled off his little trick. All in all,
honestly, Alcius, the droid army would not make the guardsmen sweat. Like, once they were actually engaged, once the guardsmen actually engaged them, it would not make your typical guardsman worry too much, if at all. It would just, they would just stare at them like, this is what we have to fight. This is okay. You know, this is all right. I can fight this all day. I can work with this all day long. I don't need to worry too much about this.
all, Sarge's team would have been in a great position if it weren't for the fact that his and Twitch's collars had more or less incapacitated them and were making some very worrying imminent detonation indicating beeps. Team Doc was in a better position, if worse shape given Tink's broken legs, Doc's broken ribs, and Nubby's rather hazy mental state after the repeated psychic attacks.
Do we really have to worry about Nubby's mental state at all? I mean, this is natural for him.
Trainees had all come through the fiasco unscathed and were unloading the room at a rapid rate. Now that Tink had announced that there was no point worrying about setting off alarms, in short order everyone was armed and equipped. Oak's special boxes had been extracted, and the only questions left were who to send to relieve Sarge's team and, unfortunately, what to do with the commissar. Our valiant commissar, unironically given the man's recent kill count, was not only awake but borderline coherent as well.
Oh, God.
A hurried, semi-factual explanation that we were here to collect Amy's stuff, but had been ambushed by inquisitorial traitors, was accepted readily enough, as was our insistence that it all been his idea, including the part where 3 of us were disguised as HQ stormtroopers. The sticking point was the man's insistence on not only participating in, but leading some sort of sortie and killing more of those fancy rosette-sucking bastards, as well as rescuing Amy and her nice tits.
Yes.
Also his refusal to give up either his las pistol or bottle. Combined with Tink's broken legs and insistence that he needed to stay at the cogitator, the decision was quickly reached to allow the commissar his little adventure, if only to get his commissarial data slate in range of Sergeant Twitch. Doc had to go as well as the de facto commander, and Nubby was drafted to push the pallet and keep the commissar under supervision, while the trainees were directed to stay put, keep our evac secure, and finish prepping our gear for extraction. The final member of the rescue team was Spot, now disconnected from the security system and hovering invisibly ahead of the relief force, performing the usual scouting duties as well as acting as a door-opening guide skull. In short order, the commissar's pallet was loaded with Oak's spooky boxes, an impressive supply of ammunition, and a sizable crate of grenades, packs, and mines for our poor undersupplied demo trooper.
I know, right?
The commissar, growing increasingly excited at the prospect of a valiant charge, didn't seem to notice that all these were placed in cover behind him, rather than the reverse, and eagerly bellowed at Nubby to push him faster so he could hit the vile heretics with his now empty drink.
Is anybody getting Mazda Mundi vibes from this commissar? Instead of a floating chair, he has a pallet. Instead of magic, he has alcohol. I'm just saying.
With Tink and Spot's scouting and door opening, the relief force crossed the facility in a remarkably short time, with no hindrances greater than the occasional panicked scribe or stormtrooper, dodging out of the way and yelling at us for violating the facility rules on both running and riding pallets. This abruptly changed when we reached the broken junction connecting to Oak's hallway, where Spot spotted a fire team of disguised inquisitorial agents that had set up a fortified position by propping 3 of the doors open with heavy crates. Their opponents, a few disorganized stormtroopers trying to...
Dude, repressed, man. Thank you, dude. Okay, let me take a look at... Dude, I appreciate it. I really do appreciate it. As someone who is shaky on the capabilities of the Emperor, what level of reality warping would it take to take him down? Is Marvel's Scarlet Witch at her peak capable, or would it take somebody physically controlling the story like Magi Sinbad? The Emperor at his prime, at his most capable, repressed, is more than capable of taking down Scarlet Witch. More than capable of taking down Scarlet Witch. You would have to find somebody who... The Emperor had the mental abilities to quite simply take down... Yeah, we just don't know really his limits. With the psychic amplifying Golden Throne, he was able to hold back the warp, and is still doing that even though he's in a chair. Which, aside from only a few other beings, no one has ever shown the capability of being able to do that. What is the best way to say it? He's probably stronger than any 4 Eldar Farseers put together. The Emperor with the Infinity Gauntlet is a ridiculous idea. Nicholas, no, he was not a regular guy. He was not a regular guy at all. Thank you, Repressed. I would have to say that the list of people that could take the Emperor down psychically from other franchises is excessively limited. And I mean more than excessively limited, because we still don't know the full capabilities of the Emperor. We still don't know what they are able to do, what he is actually able to do at the end of the day. We just simply don't know. We do know approximately how powerful he is. But it took Horus, quite simply put, being juiced. The Chaos Gods literally poured pure energy into him in order for him to combat the Emperor after the Emperor had been sitting on the Golden Throne for years at a time, holding back the warp from entering Terra. A feat that burned Malkador the Sigillite out within a few hours, and Malkador was the second most powerful Psyker, arguably third next to Magnus. Yeah, it would be a whole feat and a half, to say it bluntly, to find somebody that could arguably do that. Thank you, Repressed Man. I really do appreciate it. I do.
To leapfrog up one of the side halls seemed to be holding the majority of their attention. Doc called a short halt at the junction door between us and the hostiles' kill zone, where
it's something you have to understand about how strong the Emperor is. The Emperor is the most powerful. This is the difference in power gap that we're talking about here. Malkador had, when the actual everything happened, when the Emperor went to fight Horus at the end of the Great Crusade, Malkador sat down on the Golden Throne. Malkador was so strong, he almost killed Horus just with his mind. He just about killed him with his mind. But Malkador was dead. He was technically dead. His soul was devoured in a few hours. He literally did not exist anymore. The Golden Throne and the pressure of holding back the warp, quite simply put, wiped him out. And it only took a few hours. And Malkador was the second strongest Psyker next to the Emperor himself. Now, the Emperor, on the other hand, has been sitting on the Golden Throne for 10,000 years. That's the power difference that we're looking at here. He bitch slapped more than a few Psykers. He actually took a hit from he took a hit from Lorgar. And yeah.
Very
Thank you,
confused
Repressed.
and slightly shot stormtrooper, armed with nothing but a data slate, warned everyone not to open the door if we didn't want to get shot.
That's always
The
a good
medic,
way.
after a brief pause to hit the man with a stim and toss him both a field dressing and a las pistol, evaluated the tactical possibilities and proposed popping our own door open enough to hit them with a quick nade barrage.
And also, here's another thing that not many people understand. Apparently, Malkador, Jakatai Khan, Malkador was not originally called Malkador. Malkador was a figure that apparently was on the level of one of the worst dictators we've ever had. The Emperor recognized his talents and pretty much gave him a facelift and a new identity. And that was the reason why Malkador was helping the Emperor so much. But Malkador was a dictator of the worst sort. And this was found out by one Primarch, and that was the Khan.
And then, moving up in tandem with the stormtroopers in the other hall. This plan completely failed to account for the Commissar, who berated him for his cowardice, shouted at the wounded stormtrooper to stop bleeding, get up and open the door, and ordered Nubby to charge. Amazingly, not only did both troopers follow these dubious orders, so did Tank. In the dead Psyker closet, our techie consulted Spot's view from the enemy's makeshift pillbox and tried to figure out which icons on the cogitator, all of them now in Tau script, corresponded to which door. After nearly 3 seconds of this tedious drudgery, he shrugged and just mashed them all. As every single hall, room, and closet door in the area abruptly locked open, the confusion level rose by several notches. especially for the 4 presumably conspiracy agents holding the junction, who suddenly had a lot less cover to work with.
Uh-oh.
They were so busy scrambling for cover from the no longer suppressed stormtroopers that they didn't even notice Nubby and the Commissar until the first few poorly aimed las pistol shots hit the walls, floor, and ceiling around them.
Nicholas, what you got to understand about the Emperor and why they call him the Anathema is because when you hear the term Chaos Gods, you think gods as in we would think of them as in the Greek gods, as in the Viking gods. You cannot think of the Chaos Gods that way. Think of them as overly bloated parasites, and you have about the same idea. I did a video one time on how the Chaos Gods actually operate in the 40K universe. They're not gods in the traditional sense that you would actually consider them. They're literally parasites. Think about a leech in its final form. That's all it is. That's all Slaanesh is. That's all Tzeentch is. That's all Khorne is. They are manifestations of an idea. Like Nurgle is flat out the natural order. Khorne is survival of the fittest. Slaanesh is emotion itself. Tzeentch is evolution and change. They parasitically feed off these emotions in the warp and grow stronger as a result and learn new tricks. But if you quite literally, what the Emperor was trying to do, and the reason they called him in the Anathema, is he was trying to cut off their primary food sources. Once you stop feeding, once Slaanesh is not able to feed off of all of these different myriad emotions, Slaanesh becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. Now, the emotions still exist. But the power is no longer behind them.
Doc's shots rather better aimed thanks to his stationary position, not to mention sobriety.
True,
and
Alpharius.
Spock's Tau marker thingy dropped a deformed young man dressed as a scribe. Combined with the wounded stormtrooper's own covering fire and the fusillade coming from the side hall, the enemy barely managed to get a single volley of poorly aimed shots off before the Commissar, Nubby, and the pallet full of high explosives and eldritch boxes reached them. Of course, since neither Nubby nor the Commissar had put any thought into stopping the pallet, the fight literally didn't stop there.
Yay!
The now only 2 agents watched in stunned surprise as the pallet, with the Commissar flailing a bottle in one hand and a pistol in the other, and Nubby hunched up behind him, wildly firing his pulse carbine, barreled right through the junction.
Nice.
The whole stopping problem was then solved by the more substantial barricade of boxes, along with a Vox unit, the man in the big hat sitting on the floor and yelling into said Vox unit, and the Medicae patching said man's numerous frag wounds. There was an audible crunch as the heavy pallet bounced over Inquisitor Big Hat's knees, briefly dragging the screaming man along as the charge crashed to a halt in a scattered pile of inquisitorial evidence boxes. Nubby, screaming just as much, though in blind panic as opposed to pain.
I'll talk more about it at the end of this,
The
Nick.
Inquisitor finally rolled free and hosed the man with point-blank automatic pulse fire.
Yay!
The burst was followed, rather too late, by a crackling buzzing sound and the man's leaking corpse teleporting away. Nubby shrugged, shot the crumpled form of the Medicae a few times instead, and then hopped up to help the Commissar fire wildly down the hallway full of panicking conspiracy agents.
Yes!
In Oak's vault, Sarge and Twitch cursed in relief as their collars finally stopped with the shocking and beeping, and staggered up to the barricade just in time to take advantage of the ensuing chaos. Amy, with the advantage of prior warning and Tink's drone hastily marking her targets, managed to drop 2 agents in stormtrooper armor before the fight even properly started.
Nice.
On cue, at least 2 scrawny scribes yanked away one of the shelves forming the right side of the barricade, and Sarge and Twitch squeezed through the gap. Under the dubious cover of the Commissar and Nubby's random firing, Sarge and Twitch sprinted, more lurched, past 2 distracted storm agents who didn't have time to turn and follow before Amy's second volley dropped them as well.
Nice.
Reaching the open door of the lower security vault across the hall, Sergeant Twitch swept the room, finding nothing more dangerous than 2 more terrified and confused scribes, and took up firing positions as the initial confused chaos began to resolve into a proper firefight.
Yay!
Or it would have, if both sides had brought a crate of grenades. At Twitch's urgent insistence, Nubby abandoned the barricade to the somehow still unshot commissar and cracked open a good old-fashioned big box of boom. Well, more of a big box of assorted thrown munitions, because the first 2 to pop over the barricade were flashes, followed by another pair of smokes and the commissar's empty bottle. The bottle's owner, who hadn't caught the flashes out, swore and continued firing undeterred. Under this cover, Sergeant Twitch put the last of their shots into the stunned idiot pretend stormtroopers who'd neglected to actually wear their damned helmets' photo visors. For all the damage they did, though, it was Amy that really convinced the rest of the hallway's occupants to get into cover and stay there. One eye closed and the other eye held directly to the Xenotech scope on her beloved rifle, she leaned out into the hall and started picking off enemies through the billowing smoke.
Alfarius, that's the best
the Wonder
comparison.
Drone marked them. Of course, the enemy being, inquisitorial agents too, and presumably better trained ones at that, did not take this lying down. Our little dynamic entry had blown open their rear flank and scattered the unprepared reserves and specialists, but they rapidly began laying down their own covering fire and coordinating a tactical advance. Worse,
Nice.
from the far end of the hall, where there seemed to be some sort of ongoing firefight with some security stormtroopers, a gangly form that glowed far too brightly on Spot's thermal imaging turned from the fight.
Dude, repressed, man. I appreciate it. God, man. Hold on a second. Let me take a look at this. Has the Emperor ever faced somebody that can eliminate concept? No. He is the person that wants to eliminate concepts. Could powers like him, because powers like all fiction affect him? Kumonga eliminated all color in his series Madoka Box just to mess with an artist. Could he potentially do the same with the Emperor's Godhead? The Emperor, the biggest joke in 40K is that the Emperor is referred to as the God Emperor of mankind. That is the biggest, most cruel, practical joke that could have been played on the universe to the Emperor, because he was wanting to remove this from humanity. He wanted to remove this requirement from humanity. So the fact that the Emperor is now worshipped as a god is the biggest joke of the setting. Now, as far as eliminating concepts, that is something that quite literally no one in 40K could do. I don't think there's any being that can do that. Not really heal humanity, but just basically he wanted to crush religion. So, when I talk about the Chaos Gods and their true nature in a little bit, I'm going to talk about why what the Emperor was doing made them call him the Anathema. That's like the reason they called him the Anathema is because of what they knew he was going to do, what he was going to attempt. And yeah, it's not that inexplicable. No, it wasn't. How pissed would he be? Alcius, he would be fucking fuming. When one of the first things I said when I turned on text-to-speech device in the first days of this channel was, when the Emperor wakes up, when the Emperor notices what's going on with his Imperium, the first thing that he's going to do is spend the next 100 years slamming his head against the wall. Flat out. He's just going to be beating his head against the wall over and over and over, and that's all you're going to hear. And when I heard that Gilman was waking up, I said the exact same thing. He's going to look around, see, he's going to be like, he's going to wake up, he's going to be like, hey, oh wow, we're still alive. Why are you worshiping Dad? Why are you worshiping Dad? First words. But repressed, all fiction, I don't know. It would, Nicholas, it would have to be a crazy concept character. There are people in 40K that could probably fight the Emperor. But yeah. Thank you, Repress, man. My God, man. I really appreciate it, man.
Amy swore as the figure pointed an arm directly towards her and fired an Emperor-damned Melta-beam out of his hand. For once, Amy actually bloody ducked, barely dodging
They're still
under the
Catholics,
beam
too.
as it blasted a glowing hole through the several crates and a fair bit of wall, as well as setting the barricade on fire.
Blanks,
Sarge
yeah.
looked on with an expression of appropriately sergeanty approval, which transformed into an evil grin as Nubby hucked a bandolier of frags into Twitch's waiting hands. Acting before someone could tell him not to, Twitch pulled a single pin off the
Nicholas.
bandolier, set the whole thing whirling down the smoke-filled hall, and told Nubby to toss him another. There were no further
There are
pyromantic melted
true
beams.
Fox Leader.
Covering grenade barrages being more
Most of them are anime girls that are 16 and are in sailor uniforms, pretty much.
effective than covering fire, Sarge decided he could be spared to do some sergeanting, and began coordinating the actual secret mission part of the secret mission.
Oh!
The growing collection of terrified, psychically traumatized scribes cowering inside the assorted vaults was barked into order under the pretense of an evacuation. This evac was unexpectedly aided by the commissar, still firing wildly down the hallway, slurrily announcing that he'd come to save them and urging them to hurry while he still had the heretics pinned. The remarkably orderly file of aged pencil pushers filed along the edges of the hall, and were passed into the proper care of a puffing, limping Doc and the wounded stormtrooper he'd seemingly adopted.
I'll answer
In
that
an
after
act of
this,
actual
Alkius.
tactical brilliance, the medic used this influx of civvies as an excuse to redirect the rest of the reinforcing stormtroopers coming up the side hall back around to help their compatriots fighting to take the far junction. The sight of Twitch giddily dispensing grenades down smoking, burning hallway strongly reinforced the tactical sense of not going this way, and the stormtroopers departed without argument. With the civvies, not to mention witnesses, out of the way, and Nubby finishing dispensing munitions, Sarge dropped back to help the little trooper haul Oak's boxes off the pallet and crouch run them down to the main vault. The barricade being slightly collapsed and on fire, the non-com declined to try and worm his way through personally, and jammed Nubby and the boxes through one of the gaps, before voxing Tink to ask if he knew why the damn fire suppression system wasn't working. He then swore as a sudden geyser of white powder began shooting out of every vent in the hallway, along with even more alarms.
Yay.
More surprising, and considerably more distracting, was the sudden appearance of several conspiracy agents sprinting up the hall, whether seizing the reduced vision as a chance to charge our position, or just withdraw from the besieged junction, and sudden rush was more than Twitch's indiscriminate barrage could handle alone, and both Sarge and Amy hastily returned to firing down the hall. In between scanning the hallway to the next marker-lit form, coughing and cursing his...
Hold on a second, guys. Sorry about that.
helmet's lack of rebreather, Sarge bellowed at Nubby to swap Oak's boxes with the empty ones on the table and get back out of there.
Mm-hmm.
He was less than happy to have a nasal little voice ask what to do with all the stuff in our boxes, because a lot of it was just traffic tickets, but some of it looked pretty valuable.
Zan, actually, that's something that's actually canon. More to the point, the Emperor was about to become the god of non-belief.
Specifically, all these really fancy tech thingies. Sarge, sparing an exasperated second to explain to Nubby that he'd been supposed to unload the boxes before bringing them, and no, Shoika made me do it, is still not a valid excuse for skiving out on one's duties.
No, it's not.
And to just dump them all into the other boxes, since we were bringing them back out with us. Nubby asked if that included the parking tickets, and was told to shut up and soldier, before Sarge
shut up and soldier.
came in there and gave him a demonstration. Properly motivated, it didn't take long for Nubby to do the swap. Before the attacking conspiracy agents could accomplish anything more than getting their 2 point men shot, Nubby, in the incriminating crates, squeezed back out of the hallway, and the withdrawal started. Twitch, who'd scrambled back to the pallet when he'd run out of grenades again, started dispensing the leftover frags and smokes. Combined with Amy's overwatch, this was decent enough cover for Sarge and Nubby's sprint back to the pallet with the cargo. Swearing at each other as the occasional blind-fired lasbolt scorched overhead, and swearing at the commissar when one of his even less aimed shots actually hit Sarge in the shoulder, to no effect. The pair hefted the boxes back onto the pallet, and then covered Amy's retreat. The conspiracy agents made their move with perfect timing, starting their attack at the exact same moment Amy started her sprint. A tight cluster of the ones in stormtrooper uniforms made a mad sprint through the edge of the smoke, taking up Amy's old position as if they'd actually planned and practiced the whole maneuver. Even more shocking than their sudden appearance was the enemy's ability to not only use cover intelligently, but to actually do it better than us. Sarge traded 2 shots for 0 hits, a terrifying graze along his helmet, and shot that somehow, despite his cover and all sane logic, managed to hit him square in the left leg. Twitch at least managed to drop one before a downright ridiculously well-timed lasbolt nailed him in the chest plate mid-second shot. Not quite penetrating, fortunately. Nubby, not being a chump, decided to keep his head down and perform the very important task of turning the commissar's pallet around in preparation for imminent cheesing it. The commissar, seemingly unaware of the danger or the fact that he'd been shot twice, bellowed incomprehensibly as he turned in his seat to keep firing. Amazingly, despite this sudden onslaught, Amy managed to keep her sprint without taking a hit.
Nice.
Whether luck or fate, she managed to duck or dodge every shot fired her way, ending in a final little hop onto turning pallet and taking up a firing position, leaning around the commissar's rotating chair. This heroic maneuver was subsequently spoiled by a spookily well-aimed lasbolt, which would have nailed the markswoman in the face if it hadn't had the bulk of the commissar's leg to burn through on its way.
Ooh.
Despite having an entire limb charred to uselessness, the commissar didn't seem to notice his injury any more than his others, at least not—
Well, the man has natural painkillers in the form of about a 2.5 alcohol level, and I mean percentage.
Until his effort to keep turning and firing led him to actually put his weight on the appendage. The commissar collapsed more or less directly onto Amy and was followed by his augmetically connected chair, which at least offered the pair some cover. Sarge and Twitch, who also had cover, not that it seemed to be doing anything, hurriedly crawled backwards out of the contested hallway as eerily curving lasbolts landed around them. Sarge made a little pained grunting sound as one of them found their mark in the general vicinity of his already shot leg, and flopped prone halfway through the door. Fortunately, Nubby, standing by exactly for such an occasion, as opposed to just, standing by,
yeah,
was able to grab the big non-com's arm and drag him the rest of the way into the junction and around the corner.
Nice.
Overhead, a translucent blur shot by, and the hallway's heavy security door slammed shut. The panting silence that followed was punctuated by the sound of a few dozen lasbolts plinking ineffectively off the closed door, as well as the commissar and Amy's curses and Sarge informing everyone present that he'd been shot in the ass. Twice. Doc, standing in one of the side halls with the better part of a dozen real stormtroopers and what looked to be even more scribes than he'd started with, took this as an invitation. Doc's triage started with Sarge, but his heroic butt wounds were passed over in favor of the commissar's half-shot-off leg.
Yeah, that would be—
While the medic did his work, the question of why the scribes were still around was raised, and Doc explained that they'd been unwilling to go anywhere without a trusted escort. Despite the shotness of his ass, our heroic commander could still recognize a tactical moment when he stepped in one, and loudly announced that we'd leave this position to the stormtroopers while we pulled back with the non-combatants to the aid station, the one that definitely existed.
Yes.
Whether it was respect for someone who'd just stormed the position they'd been assaulting, and with half their numbers, or thankfulness for how much easier the big closed door made their job, or just Sarge's Sargeness, the stormtroopers let us and the scribes leave without any awkward questions. Sarge was loaded onto the pallet, along with a crate for Doc to sit on while he worked on patching the Commissar's wounds, and Nubby started pushing them along while Amy and Twitch took point in rearguard. The Commissar, having been hauled back upright along with his chair by some helpful stormtroopers, perked up as Doc hit him with a stim and, at the medic's urging, bellowed a gaggle of scribes into semi-orderly ranks behind us as we made our leisurely retreat.
Nice.
In the time it took the overloaded pallet and small army of scribes to traverse the facility, both Sarge and the Commissar were patched up to the point of functionality, and a few ideas about how to ditch our baggage and extract were floated. To nobody's surprise, it was Doc's plan that Sarge ended up adopting, specifically the part where he suggested offloading both the scribes and the Commissar together, leaving us free to get the hell out of there before the Inquisition got its shit together. Amy was sent ahead and greeted us at what was now the Dead Psyker hallway in her cadet commissar uniform, though still holding her pulse rifle. In a feat of genuinely good acting, the markswoman congratulated the commissar on his successful mission to rescue the bureaucratic lifeblood of the Imperium.
Yes!
And reported that she and her Penal legionnaires had secured the room full of unconscious naked guys as he'd instructed. The Commissar, who'd been brought nearly to the point of sobriety between the adrenaline and Doc's stims, gave Amy a slightly dubious look as she lauded his tactical genius and selfless bravery, but was smart enough to just shut up and roll with it. Between Amy and the ex-scribe trainee, the elderly Commissar was prompted through a very, very creative interpretation of the day's events. It started believably enough with him volunteering to help collect her things, and then quickly veering into complete fiction at the part where his boon companion, Commissar Sourface, tipped us off to some sort of foul doings in the evidence building. By the end of it, both elderly commissars had been painted as the biggest damn commissarial heroes since Bloody Cain, and despite literally all evidence to the contrary, the still growing mob of frightened pencil pushers ate it up like Nubby at a buffet.
Nice.
The one sticky moment in all this was when Commissar Kelly, hero of the Imperium, raised the question of what happened to Commissar Sourface. After a brief pause for thought, Amy straight-facedly explained to both the man and the audience that Sourface had died.
Oh.
Heroically.
The
Commissar's
to her, with the chainsword.
Expression didn't change much, but he grinned a little as he leaned in and asked just how heroically she meant. Amy grinned a little too and quietly informed him that we'd had to use buckets to hold all the little pieces. The pair shared a moment of profound mutual satisfaction at this word picture, and then the old commissar sat back up, winked at her, and began loudly eulogizing his longest-serving comrade to the assembled audience. Behind all this, several overloaded pallets were quietly lined up in the hallway, and 5 stormtroopers and 5 legionnaires became 10 legionnaires, all ready to depart with Lady von Humperdinck's personal effects, if she was done here. We had a ship to catch after all. Catching the hint nicely, Commissar Kelly waved Amy and the rest of us off, promising to stay here and keep the scribes safe until the all-clear came.
Yes.
As we nonchalantly rounded the corner and then immediately kicked it up to a full sprint, we could hear the familiar voice of the good scribe, operating on a suggestion from one of the trainees, asking if it was true the 2 commissars had stationed here under orders of the Ordo Chronos. The helpful old scribe seemed very concerned about how long it had been since anyone had reviewed the hold pending order, and suggested there might be something that could be done to resolve the issue. He seemed rather shocked when the commissar burst into tears. Our vague plan for changing back into our legionnaire uniforms and exiting inconspicuously via the freight bay hit a snag when the 2 squads of now fully armed and armored stormtroopers stationed there immediately spotted us.
Yes,
2 of the stormtroopers made a beeline for us, causing a brief moment of panic,
Nicholas,
until we recognized the freshly cleaned chainsword and bandaged fingers on the Storm Rupert, backed up by the bulky form of what was presumably the same sergeant from the desk. While Amy fielded the Storm Rupert and his proudly proffered chainsword with the rigid politeness of someone who desperately wanted to just shoot the man, the security sergeant scanned our whole group and then bore down on Sarge. In a hushed voice, the non-com had asked, if we had any idea what in the Emperor's name was going on, because some incompetent screwhead of an excuse for a tech priest had not only managed to accidentally crash the comm network, they'd actually done it twice, and it was all he could do to keep the Storm Rupert from going off to reconnoiter. Tink took offense at this description, beginning to explain that while the first time had been an accident, taking it back down the second time had been totally intentional. Sarge cut this all off before it could start and gave his brother non-officer a level look, before bluntly announcing that word was that Inquisitor Big Hat had rolled in with an infiltration force complete with psyker support, got caught, and got shot. The security sergeant swore in a familiar tone of someone who'd told them that was going to happen, and marched off to extract the Storm Rupert from an exceedingly unwise attempt to buckle Amy's holster on for her. We completed our exit without further violence, if only barely, and beat a restrained retreat back towards the camp. As we approached, it became obvious that embarkation was in full swing, and there wasn't much time before people started being marked AWOL. In fact, it was already past that point, according to the panicked-looking Cadet Commissar Sniffy, who ran up from where he'd been leaning outside the front gate, conveniently out of sight of any superior officers, and demanded to know where in the Emperor's name we'd been, and Commissar Kelly still was. Cadet Sniffy's questions had been directed at the ex-scribe trainee, presumably because of their working relationship manning the Commissar's paperwork.
Right.
But seemed just as willing to accept an answer from fellow cadet Amy. Both of them just looked at Sarge, though, and the non-com gruffly hauled himself up from his comfortable spot laying face down on one of the boxes. Once again, going for brevity, Sarge announced that we'd gone to get Amy's shit. Commissars Kelly and Sourface had gotten themselves involved in an internal Inquisition pissing match again, and we'd left them to it in favor of catching our ride off this bloody rock. Cadet Sniffy's face was a study in anxiety as he processed this and desperately tried to figure out where the feces were going to fall and how best to avoid getting any of it on him.
Right.
Sarge, seeing a young sorta officer in desperate need of some handling, limped over and put a paternal, not to mention sweaty, blood-spattered, and very heavy, arm around Cadet Sniffy's shoulders. He quietly reassured the young man that he didn't need to worry because old Kelly had been looking out for him. Or to be more precise, he'd been looking out for Amy, and had asked his inexplicably reconciled old enemy Sourface to field promote her, as well as transferring her to the outgoing Legion. At this point, Sarge gave Tink a meaningful look, which the techie missed entirely as he sat on his makeshift throne of spooky boxes, blatantly screwing around with a slightly bloody commissarial data slate. Twitch had to poke him. Cadet Sniffy wasn't quite dim enough to miss Tink's self-narrated exploration of the slate's personnel management tool, but this meant he was bright enough not to raise a fuss and get his neck broken.
Right.
Nubby helpfully informed the bug-eyed cadet this was one of them posthumous promotion thingies. Totally legit. Sniffy hesitantly checked his data slate's little digital org chart of permanent base personnel, marveling at
Thank you,
Amy's
Nicholas.
new
I appreciate it,
status as
bud.
his provisional superior, until she abruptly disappeared off it entirely. Sarge grinned down at the trembling young cadet commissar and asked whether he'd like a promotion and transfer too. Provisional Commissar Sniffy nodded. Aided and abetted by the increasingly optimistic Sniffy, we managed to walk our entire convoy straight into one of the massive troop lifters nestled into the mud of the mustering field. There was a brief hiccup as a cogboy leapt into our path, nearly going down under the wheels of Twitch's pallet, but he only seemed to be interested in re-sanctifying our collars, machine spirits, that and all the mud.
Yes, of course.
Once a servitor had hosed us off, it was just a matter of requisitioning a cargo unit for Commissar von Humperdinck's personal effects, and then settling into our assigned seats like good little penal legionnaires.
Yes.
It was a nerve-wrenching hour before our lifter sealed its hatches, but no inquisitors, stormtroopers, or senior commissars came looking for us. In fact, the chaos of what seemed to be a very rushed deployment was enough to keep anyone aside from the odd, grimly curious legionnaire from asking any questions, and it wasn't hard for Amy to quash those. The transfer to the high-security Munitorum troopship, already packed near full with 3 other legions and their attendant commissarial blocking units, was a bit trickier, involving dodging senior commissars, Munitorum bean counters, and an overly inquisitive cybermastiff. Fortunately, a combination of lies, bribery, and Tink's continued infiltration of the commissarial datanet got all of us aboard, including the nervous Sniffy, who practically sobbed with relief when Sergeant Amy finally said he could go. As the painfully junior commissar jogged off to catch his transfer shuttle, Amy confided that she and Tink had found him a ground logistics unit whose commissarial berth had been left empty for the better part of 2 centuries. She hoped he liked long drives.
Yay!
Rather than put any poor overworked Munitorum and commissariat busybodies through the effort of finding somewhere to put us, we secured our own berth in a small cargo bay which had been mysteriously assigned to both organizations, depending on which datanet you checked. The door was then locked, barred, and rigged with directional mines by a hysterically relieved Twitch.
We all knew it was coming. Like, I have listened to 3 hours and 50 minutes so far, and Twitch has not once set suicidal defenses in place.
Perimeter secured at bloody last, Sarge finally gave the order to stand down, and then limped to the front of the line for Tink to remove his damned collar. Fourth in this line, per guard issue pecking order, was Nubby, who brought up the question of where to shove this tacky thing what won't fit back in its box. The oblong conglomeration of slightly battered electronics that Nubby pulled from his pocket looked like almost nothing Tink had ever seen. Admittedly, that almost was doing a lot of work standing in for the time we'd rediscovered a Necron ship retrofitted with a techno-heretical combination of Tau and Imperial tech.
Right.
The question of why Nubby had a bunch of Archaeotech in his pocket was immediately raised by literally everyone present, though, per tradition, Sarge was allowed to lead the interrogation. Nubby's expression rapidly shifted from proudly proactive procurer to guy who didn't do nothing and nobody saw him anyways.
True.
As he explained that someone had installed fake bottoms in our spooky boxes like we wouldn't notice. Even worse, they'd done it with our stuff. Or at least, he was pretty sure that both the cardboard and the faux velvet lining came from his stash in that one closet just down the hall from the psyker containment cells back on the occurrence border.
Uh-huh.
He'd been debating ripping it all out, it being his personal property, and Sarge insisting that everything was supposed to come out of our spooky boxes. But then they wouldn't have matched the inside of the boxes they were replacing, which was all why he'd stuck to simply grabbing the techie thing that had been hidden inside the last box's fake bottom.
Nicholas, I haven't decided on that yet. I'll be figuring that out sometime tomorrow. I may be doing another live stream tomorrow. I do not know. But definitely for Battletech Tuesday. Definitely Battletech Tuesday. We start on the Succession Wars in Battletech Tuesday.
The said techie thing was, well, a techie thing.
Yes.
What it did, or how it was supposed to be controlled, was unclear, but parts of it were definitely recognizable as ours. Tink identified several Taoish components as parts of Spot 2.0, along with a few others from one of the frequently repaired psi suppressors, and what he swore was a piece of our Wraithbone. Just as recognizable, if much less ours, was the fist-sized Necron cube wedged in the middle of the thing. The little yellow sticky note saying, "This end towards demon," was new, though. There was not a reaming. Sarge was too tired. Instead, the question of how to unfuck up this most monumental of fuck-ups was raised and vigorously debated. The whole concept of going back to the evidence building and putting the damn thing back was rejected, though the idea of sending Nubby to do it himself had a certain grim appeal to it. The distant second best would be getting the device itself back to Inquisitor Oak, or at the very least a message to the effect of, someone accidentally disarmed your super-secret Archaeotech anti-demon mine, but that was hampered by the man's status as the Inquisition's most wanted. Not only did we not know where the man was or how to reach him, we weren't even sure there was anyone else who actually did. The interrogator he'd sent to help us was long gone, and the only other one of his agents known to us was the little old lady adept who'd helped railroad us into the Penal Legion.
Dude, Alva. Oh my god. Dude, I appreciate it. I really do. Guys, let me read this. If you have to theorize how the story went if Erebus' attempted corrupting Horus went awry, how do you think the story of the Empire without the corrupted Horus would go? Would there be a different Horus heresy level event? How would that even happen? I'll say it like this. A lot of the Primarchs that the Chaos Gods chose as their vessels, like, were not the initial choice. Were not the initial choice of those particular Chaos Gods. Like, Nurgle wanted Perturabo. Mortarion was a consolidation prize, okay? Khorne wanted Sanguinius. Oh, chat's frozen, yeah. It became unfrozen. It does that from time to time. Khorne wanted Sanguinius. Khorne most definitely wanted Sanguinius. And in fact, Sanguinius' Blood Angels dropping to Khorne instead of the World Eaters would have put the World Eaters to absolute fuckmothering shame. It would have been a horror show beyond a horror show. Because not even the World Eaters in their most savage berserker states could stand up to the Blood Angels when they dropped to the Thirst. It literally terrified the World Eaters when the Blood Angels gave in to the Thirst at this final part of the Siege of Terra. There would have been a different Horus Heresy level event. It would have been smaller scale. It would have been much smaller scale. It probably would have involved Magnus at the very, very least. There were a couple of Primarchs that were going to fall regardless. Fulgrim was going to fall. Angron was practically going to turn the second that anything was dropped. Perturabo might have if Horus hadn't gotten him to come over to their side. Mortarion was ready to turn on the Emperor because he felt like the Emperor stole from him. It would have been a much smaller scale, much more limited in scope, and not nearly as effective. That's what would have happened there. But it was truly Magnus's fault what wound up happening at the end of the day, because Horus knew that Erebus was lying to him. Horus knew Erebus was lying to him. He figured out that the person he was talking to inside the dream was not Janus. He figured out that the person that Erebus was representing, he was basically being lied to. And Magnus, when he was trying to convince Horus not to turn, actually wound up being the catalyst for Horus turning, because he was like, you are sitting here right now not respecting the wishes of her father. Why should I? And it didn't help that the Chaos told him everything he needed. They told him 99.9% of the truth. They just failed to mention, and by the way, this is your fault. I really do appreciate it, Alva. I really appreciate it. Erebus and the Chaos Gods told Horus 99.99% of the truth. They just left off the part where, by the way, all of this is your fault.
Even if we could get either the device or a message through Inquisition security to the Adept, there wasn't a guarantee she'd be in a position to actually do anything.
Oh my god.
The trainees, not...
Give me a second, guys. Oh. Oh my god. Oh my god. Guys, I really, really appreciate it. I really, really do. You guys have no idea how much. This has been kind of crazy, actually.
not that the term remotely applied anymore, were making a solid argument for just waiting for our promised extraction from the Penal Legion, especially on the grounds of how it had served the slippery old bastard right if he turned out to have been lying about getting us out, when Amy brought up one last option. Our markswoman very reluctantly announced that she knew someone who would know how to reach Oak if anyone did, and she was in orbit right now. Specifically, she was aboard the Exorcist-classed Grand Cruiser Furious Avenger, along with a whole regiment of Palladium super heavy armor, and with the better part of half a battle group in tow. When several seconds went by without anyone asking the obvious question, Amy finally admitted she was talking about her mother.
Yeah.
At least the presence
Mumsy.
of Lady General von Humperdinck, along with several regiments of loyal guardsmen and not insignificant amounts of naval firepower, explained why everyone had been practically bending over backwards for Amy. She assured us that she hadn't actually known herself, though, not until she and Tink had looked through the local system org chart for somewhere to send Sniffy.
Yeah.
The trainees, not having benefited from any of Amy's highly educational drunken 3 a.m. rants about her mother, needed to be brought up to speed on Amy's mom's rank and how Oak had used her to get us reassigned to the Penal Legion. The rambling stories about Lady General Mom literally crushing the bones of her political rivals under the treads of her Baneblade, Becky, and even letting an 8-year-old Amy drive on occasion, were left out. Amy firmly asserted that her mother was totally fucking in on all this inquisitorial bullshit or she wouldn't be here, and would be able to get a message to Oak at the very least. The question of whether she could do the same thing with the device itself was answered for us as the thrum of the troop ship's activating engines informed us that the embarkation had gone a lot faster than we'd expected. This was, for quite a few reasons, not a good thing.
Uh-huh.
Tink, in a moment very reminiscent of our inglorious retreat from a certain Towish PDF base, whipped out Sourface's data slate and started taking dictation from Amy and Sarge.
Please don't.
While Doc kept Twitch and Nubby from helping, and the trainees viewed the whole situation with bemused alarm. A very, very straightforward sitrep was written, encrypted, tagged with some code words Amy supplied, and sent off via the Commissariat's data network as the highest security communique the data slate could send. Then, realizing we actually had a few hours before we left the range of the orbital comm network, Amy grabbed the data slate and wrote another, rather more in-depth and better spelled version.
Probably.
We hadn't
Punctuation is key.
gotten a response by the time we transited into the warp, which was almost a relief given how beat up and exhausted we all were. Doc set about actually treating everyone's wounds, including a visit to the ship's medbay to get Tink's legs set properly. This cunning infiltration
But why, though?
was accomplished by trading out our collars and Penal Legion uniforms for our old guard kit and identifying ourselves as Guardsmen, Generian 99th, detached. The same
Nice.
trick got us into the mess, laundry, and even the astropathic sanctum, though the last one turned out to be a bust. It wasn't that they caught us or something, it was just that the astropaths were all in psychic isolation to protect them from the warp shadow of the encroaching Tyranid splinter fleet we were being sent off to delay. The news of our destination wasn't really that big a deal in and of itself. After all, when you're in a Penal Legion, every mission is a suicide mission.
True.
We were just glad it wasn't orcs. It did recontextualize
Everybody's glad it wasn't orcs, but Twitch is still going to be convinced that they are orcs. That Tyranid is an orc.
the whole situation, though. From the incredibly rushed embarkation to the presence of Lady General von Humperdinck and her battle group. The one question it really left was whether Oak was actually a cunning enough bastard for an Emperor-damned Tyranid incursion to be part of his plans, or if we were about to be hung out to dry by sheer bad luck.
Probably the latter.
This conundrum was the primary topic of discussion for the majority of the trip, and kept us nicely distracted, and Twitch and Nubby out of trouble, until we reached our destination just over a week later.
Hooray!
The debarkation of the 4 Penal Legions was less rushed. The NID's arrival time having been more firmly pinned down by some sort of techno-psychery, Our first inclination to stay in our hidey hole until the ship was mostly empty and nobody who might recognize us and ask questions was around was foiled by a Munitorum clerk coming down our hallway, opening bays for inventory and inspection. Twitch barely got his minds disarmed in time. We reluctantly put our Penal Legion uniforms back on, as well as our collars, deactivated of course, and formed up with all our gear in a convoy around a very commissarial-looking Amy. There were a few sketchy moments, especially when some familiar goonish-looking legionnaires tried to route our little baggage train through the quartermaster's tents for inventory.
Of course.
They desisted after Amy shot one in the knee, but that led to some very curious looks from the assorted commissars present, and a tactical withdrawal behind one of the landing craft that was all that kept us from an encounter with the commandant-cum-commander. Somehow, we made it to evening muster without things devolving into bloodshed, and tediously stoiced our way through an only slightly grimmer than usual pre-action speech from the brass. Things didn't get interesting until the commissar commander waved forward the Inquisitor and announced the need for volunteers for a vortex bomb deep strike on the lead Tyrannid elements. The Inquisitor, nestled in a suit of guard-issue power armor, hadn't stood out from the other battlefield brass milling around the command tent. Neither had his two psychers. At least, not until one of them started bouncing up and down waving at us, until his senior firmly pushed him back into order. Following the young psycher's gaze, the Inquisitor stomped over and loudly announced his need for a right sergeantly chap with a band of stout lads primed for a bit of daring do and conspicuous valor in the face of the unholy what. As if that wasn't enough, the Rupert strode over, Alfred and Fumbles in tow, and greeted his distant cousin, Lady Amelia Delorisista Amanita Trigestrata Zeldana Malifi von Humperdinck, and asked if she'd ever seen a vortex bomb.
She's going to shove one up his ass. She's going to shove it up his ass.
Sarah Amy blinked with a sense of vague recognition and announced that she and her honor guard stood ready, willing, and eager to see what an exterminatus-grade munition could do to the enemies of the Emperor. As a whole unit, we grabbed our shit and double-timed it for the familiar-looking stealth shuttle sitting at the edge of the field. The Commissar Commander practically sprinted over, presumably to inform the Rupert of Amy's non-expendable status, but suddenly got distracted as Fumbles and Alfred both glared in his direction. The commander was still busy chewing out a random cadet for some minor, possibly imaginary uniform infraction when we scrambled aboard the gifted Emperor's Scythe stealth shuttle and immediately lifted off.
Bye-bye.
At that point, the fact that the shuttle's pilot turned out to be Jim barely even qualified as a surprise. Introductions were made along with the traditional fancy seeing you here quips and a rather protracted roll call of the Rupert and Amy's mutual families. Surprisingly, we didn't have to introduce the trainees as the Rupert greeted them each by name, which was better than we could do, and declared himself to be downright chuffed to have some proper guardsmen serving in his retinue. The ex-scribe's correction that none of them had actually ever been in the Guard, unless you counted a few months in an undeployed Penal Legion, was blithely dismissed with a quip about it being more of a state of mind. This didn't exactly encourage them, but with a bit of reassurance from both us and Alfred, the trainees accepted their sudden career change with only a reasonable amount of dubiousness.
Don't worry about it.
As for us, we were not cordially drafted into the Rupert's inquisitorial retinue, as Oak still had shit for us to do.
Yeah, of course he does.
What specifically that
Prick.
was a bit unclear, though, since neither Jim and Fumbles, nor the Rupert and Alfred, had talked to the Inquisitor since he'd left to turn himself in. Needless to say, that remark caught our undivided attention, but the four of them insisted that it was all part of some presumably brilliant plan.
Brilliant!
Involved him showing up for his trial while the better part of 3/4 of the inquisitorial fleet was distracted. Nubby and Twitch smirked as they collected their winnings from those of us who hadn't believed Oak was capable and crazy enough to try and exploit a Tyrannid incursion for political benefit. Of course, bringing up the subject of the imminent Nids raised the question of what in the Emperor's name we were doing here. More specifically, we wanted to know why Jim was still flying us right into the Splinter Fleet's predicted emergence zone, and what that vortex bomb actually was, because we'd seen one before.
It's probably a fucking vortex bomb.
And they typically don't have either Tau or Wraithbone components. The Rupert waved these questions away as not something to tickle your wigs over.
No.
And Jim's attention seemed fully focused on the shuttle's kludged-together nav system. But Fumbles cheerfully explained that the bomb was just a fancy psi suppressor Theo put together to keep him and Alfred from exploding.
Oh, nice.
The obvious question that remark raised went unasked, as the Vox unit blared an all-ships warning of imminent Tyrannid emergence in Sector 17. Jim shouted at everyone to get in their seats and activated the weird psi suppressor. Now, we had a bit of experience with psi suppressors, or at least Tink did, but we'd never encountered one that felt like this. It was like having one of those super untouchables pressing right up against you, and both Fumbles and Alfred abruptly curled in on themselves and started shaking. For all its power, though, the device still wasn't enough to keep us from feeling the horrible, chittering, clawing force that erupted from the jagged hole in reality forming in front of us.
Oh, boy.
Amazingly, the horrible psychic pressure actually managed to grow stronger,
Nicholas.
seemingly pressing in on the psychic shielding from all sides and compressing it into a smaller and smaller area. Then, very abruptly, and with a distinct popping sensation, the pressure vanished,
Okay.
leaving a stubby little junk heap of a warp ship floating where the glowing hole in reality had been. Jim hailed the occurrence border and brought us in for a landing.
We're back on the event
Behind
horizon.
our shuttle, several very confused inquisitorial warships double-checked their Auspex reading as another small warp transition occurred, leaving a very pressing question of where the Tyrannids were, and what in the Emperor's name had just happened to all their astropaths, navigators, and sanctioned combat psychers. Aboard the occurrence border, in what was apparently no longer a warp fungus bay, a delegation consisting of a very relieved Sister Valerie and Hannah, backed up by their usual collection of medical and technical minions, welcomed us back.
Yay.
They were followed up by a considerably less welcoming delegation, consisting of an oversized servo skull with the brain of an undeniably insane Magos Biologus welded inside it. The Magos, initially intent on getting an account of the recent psychic phenomena from the badly shaken Fumbles and Alfred, abruptly stopped in midair, whirled to face the nubby-proof case full of Archaeotech handcuffed to Sarge's arm. The ear-numbing, distorted screech of, "What did you idiots do?" was, well, exactly what we expected. Sarge sighed and relinquished the case, gathered up the Rupert and Alfred, and, after establishing the definite unavailability of Doc, grabbed Amy for moral support as he headed up to the bridge for what was going to be a very, very long debriefing.
Guys. So no shit, there we were. Okay, couple of things right out of the gate. I have missed this series. I am going to miss this series even more now. There's nothing as fun as sheer insanity. If 40K didn't exist but fantasy was still going, I did not get into fantasy. Fantasy was too similar to me at the time that I first saw it to Warcraft for me to actually take it serious. And I had other fantasy worlds that I liked a lot more at the time. If not for 40K, I wouldn't be in Warhammer at all. Yeah, Zach Hazard popped up on the screen, dealing with cops. At some point, I'm gonna be checking that out. But I wouldn't be in 40K at all. I mean, in Warhammer at all if 40K didn't exist. I wouldn't even be close to it. But I did say I was going to explain a little bit more about the Chaos Gods and what they actually are. And why they considered the the Emperor, the Anathema. Okay. HTPs? Oh, Hunter of the Parentings? Yes, I am. Yes, I am. Now, the Chaos Gods, in and of themselves, they are sensations that have grown sentient. And the reason that they're so out of control right now is it's simply put, they have gotten better and better and better because of the intense emotions that have been put off over the fall of the Eldar, Age of Strife, and now the endless wars that are happening. They have gotten so good at getting food for themselves that they simply put are in a constant struggle against each other for that same set food. Now, during the Horus Heresy, there was a group that wanted Horus to win. And because the reason they wanted Horus to win was one major reason above all. If Horus won, Chaos would be victorious. And if Chaos was victorious, eventually what would happen is it would wind up destroying itself. Humanity would wind up going extinct as a result, and there wasn't enough sapient species in the galaxy to continue to power the Chaos Gods. They would literally revert back to their dormant states. Yes and no. Yes and no, Alcius. Now, Alvina, the reason why, well, the Eldar didn't really mess it up nearly as much as you might. They did and they didn't. They did and they didn't. The best way to consider what happened with the Chaos Gods was, think about it like this, okay? You have, they work very, very similar to a Warhammer, like Warhammer Fantasy demons. A demon is nothing more than a thing invented off an ideal. In 40K, in Warhammer Fantasy, there is a demon, there is a literal demon that makes your bread rise. That makes your bread rise in the oven. Because you believe it, it will happen. Okay? Because you believe it, it will happen. There's a literal demon that influences the rising of bread because it's believed. So very similar to orcs, very similar to things like that. In 40K, this is more refined down to sensations, to basic concepts. Khorne is nothing more or less than survival of the fittest. Survival of the fittest being, might makes right, justice, everything like that. But what winds up happening, and what has wound up happening is, the more extreme the act, the more food Khorne gets, the more food this parasite gets, okay? The more food this parasite gets, the stronger it becomes. And because the easiest one to really do this with is Slaanesh, because it's just easier to talk about Slaanesh in this manner. Okay, so Slaanesh gets power from anything. Slaanesh gets power from pretty much anything that causes emotion. Sadness, joy, love, happy, like lust, things like that. That powers Slaanesh. Slaanesh is emotion. Slaanesh is emotion, okay? So, the emotion caused by, say, you seeing a friend of yours for a long time and giving them a high five, that powers Slaanesh, okay? Two kids falling in love for the first time, that powers Slaanesh. All these things power Slaanesh. But the more people engage, and this is what happened with the Eldar, and this is why the Eldar, why Slaanesh rapidly became one of the most powerful Chaos Gods, is because the Eldar engaged in such excess. And Slaanesh quite simply put, got a crash course in what Khorne got during what Korn got during certain events, what Zinch got during certain events, and what Nurgle got during certain events. Eric, he actually has become a god. He technically is a god. He technically is a god at this point. But what it boils down to is Slaanesh gets a lot of food. Slaanesh gets food and substance from friends getting together, having a good time, seeing friends that you haven't seen in a long time, all this other kind of stuff, and of course, like standard sex, drugs, and rock and roll, that kind of deal as well. Anything that could create emotion, context, stuff like that. One of the best examples of how Slaanesh works in terms of and how the Chaos Gods themselves work is Slaanesh continuously wants you to experience more joy, more sadness, more everything. And the more extreme the act, the more Slaanesh gets fed. Now, the reason Chaos is self-destructing at the end of the day, and the reason they wanted Horus to win, is because, quite simply put, Slaanesh and the Chaos Gods in and of themselves have no ability to basically say, okay, I need to stop eating. The Chaos Gods will gorge themselves to literal death. They are a parasite that can and will eventually kill the host if the host doesn't back off. Okay. So Slaanesh will have people engage in worse and more violent and Slaanesh will have people engaging in more and more extreme things, more and more extreme levels, until they literally die from the experience, or because they have gotten so drowned in the experience they have forgotten to do anything else, like eating or sleeping. Nurgle, quite simply put, kills his followers, because while the sensation of a mother's affection over her child getting better from being sick powers Nurgle, he gets a lot more when that kid dies and becomes a zombie and then bites the mother and turns her into a zombie. Well, great. That's perfect. Given enough time, and given the more and more extremes, because the Chaos Gods cannot moderate themselves, they do not know how to stop eating. They will continuously cause their followers to engage in more and more extreme acts. Actually, no, Tony, Nurgle is the second strongest right now. They will continuously engage in more and more extreme acts until they literally kill their host from the process. And that is why an alien cabal wanted Horus to win, because he knew if Horus wins, Chaos will be in the ascendancy, and then Chaos will literally devour itself. And if the reason that the Emperor wanted to get the majority of the population in the webway and reduce humanity's reliance on the warp was simply put for no other reason than it would starve the Chaos Gods back into their dormant states. Nurgle was a big part of the corruption of Horus. There is the blade that was used is called the anatheme, and Erebus quite literally gave it to somebody to stab him. And the person that stabbed Horus with the anatheme was actually corrupted by Nurgle. Now, the Chaos Gods are as sentient as any parasite could be. They are a virus. Quite simply put, they are a virus. They kill the host that they're in, but because they know what works on us, they know how to get more and more food out of us. Now, nothing is stopping that Alchorus. Nothing is stopping that Alchorus. In fact, that's what the Emperor almost became. The Emperor in the warp was becoming a god of non-belief. That's true. The Emperor in the warp during the Great Crusade was becoming a new chaos god of non-belief. The concept of the Emperor was doing that. The concept of the Emperor was actually having that effect on the warp itself. And that is why the Chaos Gods considered him the anathema, because quite literally, because of the belief in the Emperor and the Imperium, the belief in them was being shut out. Now, here's something else about the Chaos Gods. Nick, we'll use you as an example. So Nick is out one day, and he decides he's going to take a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. Okay, he decides he's going to take himself a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu class. He goes in there. Hey, Korn is happy. Korn is pleased. Korn is feeling good about that situation. Okay, Korn feels good about the situation. Nick is getting himself in shape. He's making himself feel better. He's getting more fit. He's becoming a better version of himself. He adopts more discipline. All that is Korn. Korn is the god of knights as well as the god of murderers. Okay? But the more, let's say, because of how just outrageous the Chaos Gods are in 40K right now, Nick starts getting influenced. Nick starts getting influenced, bad things begin to happen. Nick's sparring with somebody, they throw a punch, it ticks Nick off, he snaps their wrist, Korn gets a little bit happy. Then Nick literally starts murdering everybody in sight, and that gets Korn really happy. It's so ridiculous. It's so ridiculous. The warp is, yes, exactly. TTS Magnus said it best. The warp isn't some Saturday cartoon villain that you can just beat. But you can starve it out. And that is what the Emperor was trying to do. Yeah, Korn starts getting excited. And that's just it. Now, actions are one thing. Belief is another. So, actions such as, Nick spazzing out and going on a Brazilian jiu-jitsu fueled neck snapping spree is one thing. But the second he starts saying blood for the blood god in the process of it, that takes the acts that Nick is doing from chicken nugget level of substance for the warp all the way to full-on rotisserie chicken with a side of caviar and truffles. It is a completely different matter at that point. Belief in the Chaos Gods, calling out to the Chaos Gods, changes things intensely. Blanks, now there's one thing that could cause Big E pause, and really anything psychically oriented, including the Chaos Gods themselves. And that would be blanks are pariahs. Now, a blank is something that was probably, when humanity was engineered by a group called the Old Ones, the blanks were part of that engineering. Blanks are flat out, non-stop. They are literally soulless. They're literally soulless. And you cannot use psychic power in the midst of one of them. They essentially reject warp energy. They are a walking Cadian pylon. What about the new gods of the warp that can oppose the Chaos Gods, gods of order, if you will, who are the more positive acts of the Chaos Gods rather than the bad? Alkeus, initially, if there was enough belief in something like that, it would take shape. The reason the that people believe that the Emperor protects is, if you believe hard enough the Emperor protects, if enough people do, there you go. What are we saying there, Nicholas? Oh, Korn. So Korn is the blood god. He's skulls, murder, everything like that. He's also survival of the fittest, justice, honor, fairness. He is all of that. He is martial. He is the martial spirit. He is the martial spirit, pretty much. That's what he is. Nurgle is nature incarnate. There's no other way to say it. Nurgle is nature itself, nature incarnate. Tzeentch is evolution. That is what Tzeentch is. Tzeentch is pure from a standpoint of their base levels of what they are, Tzeentch is evolution. And Slaanesh is emotion. That's what they are. That is exactly what they are. Now, there are lesser demons that are in charge of certain emotions, but they all are there. Actually, Tony, Ares is just Khorne by another name. That's what Ares is. Gork and Mork are just the lads. Gork and Mork, because of the way the wall works, the old ones designed the Krorks / orcs to have these two warp entities, Gork and Mork. They are designed. They are tailor-made gods. And the old ones could do that because they were pretty much all warp energy by the time it was all said and done anyway. I mean, that's just how they are. That's just how they operate. Anybody else got any questions about like the nature of chaos, anything like that? Because believe me, I did like a 45-minute video on this one time, and it was something. It was a lot. It was a lot. I think my chat may have frozen. Fox Leader, technically there's only 4. Technically there's 4. There is, Slaanesh, Nurgle, Khorne, and Tzeentch. The Emperor could be considered a 5th. He would be considered the god of humanity. He would be considered the god of humanity at this point. And then you have Chegarath. I don't know if they're ever going to bring back Malak, Tony. I don't know if they're ever really going to do anything with Malak. The Necrons would not have really had a chaos god. They really didn't have any time for any of that. They were pissed off enough at their own gods. They really, really, oh god, they couldn't stand their own gods. They just, no. Seals are good in a video. Yoda gets an intervention? Yeah, Malak ain't coming back, Tony. You know that as well as I do. He's crying in the same place they initially put the squats. So Fox, the way that orcs are, the way that orcs actually function is there is no Gork and Mork until there's enough orcs that believe in Gork and Mork. That's just the truth about it. Just the same as orcs, a single orc dropped onto a planet can make an entire society of orcs within enough generations. Why do I look like Ferrus Manus? I don't know. Hold on. I don't know, my guy. No idea. So they need worship in addition to emotions. Nicholas, no, they don't need it. But like I said, with the parasite example that I gave for the Chaos Gods and why they're ultimately self-defeating, the stronger everything is, the more they feed, the more they grow, the more powerful they get, the more they can whisper their name. Once belief starts, that's when things start getting interesting. You don't believe that Yarick is dead. The orcs could just bring him back. Technically true. If enough orcs, if there's enough orcs around you that believe 100% that you could get shot by a Bane blade and you wouldn't die, I mean, that's the reason that Yarick did so much when he was defending Armageddon, because they quite simply believed that there was the reason he had his eye taken out and the eye weapon installed was because the orcs believed that if Yarick stared at them hard, they would die. So he got the laser weapon put in. That's when he got the laser weapon put in, because he was going to put truth to belief. And then orcs would simply die from him looking at him. I mean, that's just how it was. Tzeentch controls Tzeentch's change. That is what Tzeentch is. Change, sorcery, schemes, evolution. Showed them female Chaos Gods art and said, given how the warp works, this is technically canon. This is true. It is true, Alchemist. It is true. It is very true. Aphrodite is Slanesh. Persephone, Slanesh. Hades is probably Nurgle. Any nature god is Nurgle. Any war god is Khorne. Any goddess of fertility, music, light, sound, that's all Slanesh. And any asshole is Tzeentch. Okay? Any asshole is Tzeentch. In fact, the reason that Tzeentch, the whole reason that certain things happen is because certain Chaos Gods were in ascendancy at the time. And the other Chaos Gods got jealous about it. Just flat out. Hey, no problem. I am a stupid repository of this crap. I retain this junk like water, and I do a lot of theory craft. And I actually have a second channel called Old Man Lore Stories and Theory. Yeah, oh yeah, that would be Nurgle. That would be Nurgle. No, the Emperor is not Tzeentch. The Emperor is the Emperor. In fact, the reason the Chaos Gods are so pissed is because he went to them and made a deal with them and then altered the deal. He Vadered the Chaos Gods and managed to keep his intentions hidden from the Chaos Gods because they thought the Emperor was going to be their champion, and he turned out to betray them. Tzeentch would not be the last one standing. The last one standing out of all the Chaos Gods would be Nurgle himself. The last Chaos God to be standing in the event that the Chaos Gods won would have been Nurgle himself. Secretly on fire. I'll put it to you like this. Warhammer 40k lore. The deeper you get into it, the more wild it actually gets. That's when you can start actually theory crafting. That's when things start getting kind of wild in that regard. One thing I like about certain franchises is the focus they get in the lore. Orcs, orcs are orcs. And there is no such thing as a good faction. If you want to look at it in context, there's only one neutral faction. Everyone else is evil. Everyone else is comparatively evil to the modern day. And it requires you to immerse yourself in the setting. It really, really does, which a lot of people aren't capable of doing. They just aren't capable of doing immersion into a story such as 40k, because it does require you to immerse yourself into the shoes of this society and of any society, like the Eldar. The Eldar would happily, and I mean happily, if it meant getting the old Eldar Empire back, they would gladly line up every single human in the galaxy and shoot them in the head. It would just be done. It would just be done. The Eldar are struggling to hold on to whatever they can, whatever they have left. They just don't have anything left. The Tau, at first, from the outside, appear to be this almost benevolent group that comes in and is just trying to grow a big, happy family empire, when in reality... hold on a second. Did I just lose internet connection? Reload that. Did I just lose that? Am I good? I'm good. Okay. That was weird. Let me take a look. It was those Tau infiltrators again. Hold on a second. But the Tau look like this benevolent group, this benevolent faction that is out just trying to, gain more people into their big happy family. But in reality, the greater good is whatever they say it is at the time. And the greater good is usually dictated by a small group of very, and I mean very, dictatorial and authoritarian people. Let's see. What other factions? I mean, the Harud of the Harud. Jesus Christ. Let's not even get into them. The Orcs are the simplest but the most pure race out there, flat out. Oh yeah, Alcris. It is the easiest. It is the easiest one. If the Imperium found advanced human worlds that had better technology, but instead of merging them into all of them, they killed everyone over heresy of having better technology. Actually, no, Fox Leader. That's not how that really worked. That's not how that really worked. What wound up happening is in certain that was mainly due to Horus doing stuff. That was mainly due to Horus doing some fuckery. I'll just say it like that. Crash Course in the Town, they have so many. Yeah, they have a lot of. And so does every species secretly on fire. I mean, everybody looks at this Imperium because the Imperium is the most visual symbol of an absolute dumpster fire that you can possibly imagine. And I always find it funny that nobody would want to live in 40K, period, under any circumstance, that has been a fan of 40K for any length of time. The more that you learn about it, you're more like, I don't want to be in this shithole. I just don't want to be in this. I did not see Major Kill Timmy, to be honest with you, AR-99. Well, Nicholas, it's just fun. Yeah, and for anybody that's asking, don't mention Night Lords while Avalon is in chat, because Avalon has kidnapped Sevatar and is currently trying to give him Stockholm Syndrome, so he'll love her. She's going to go after Vulcan next. Yeah, and that's the reason there's so many Tau jokes. There's so many Tau jokes and Ultramarine jokes, because when the Tau were first introduced, they were introduced as this noble, bright faction that simply, from what everybody said, it was like, okay, they are just too good to be here. And it was because they wanted to expand into different markets. And then it was just... the Halo universe, would you really, Fox Leader? The Imperium is an absolute dumpster fire, Eric. There is no help about it. Joe, we can talk about Major Kill, but at this point, I haven't seen anything from him in a little while, just because it hasn't been requested for the most part, and I haven't had time to go into it. But I don't have I haven't kept up to date with anything going on with Major Kill. I just haven't. You got 80 hours this week, Confused Guardsman? My God, my man. Take a break. There's the TTRPGs, a bunch of other stuff. It's hard to... Oh, God, yeah, dude. Nicholas, if you're looking to get into 40... Anybody that's looking to get into 40K, if anybody's looking to actually get in and start understanding 40K, my best recommendation, my absolute best recommendation, is just to start off with something that's going to interest you. Just start off with something that's going to interest you. For a lot of people, if you're looking for a badass story, I would go with the Tanith first and only. And either the Tanith first and only, or the Inquisitor, oh my God, my brain. I can't believe I forgot this guy's name. Or, of course, if you want something funny, Caiaphas Cain, because Caiaphas Cain is hilarious. Fox Leader Luton 09 is, if you're looking, if you just want flat out lore, period, 100% lore, Luton 09 is your guy to go to. Any comment on the Votan? It actually annoyed me when they brought the Votan back, when they brought the Votan in, and then they were like, oh, remember the squats got eaten by the Tyranids? Meh. Kangaroo, Joe Rogan, yeah, Baltimore is always my number one go-to guy, just because he's an excellent storyteller. Warrior Tier, I have worked with them. I am planning on working to them I'm planning on working with Warrior Tier in the future. I have worked with them on several of the projects they've had in the past. I've been a lore consultant for them on many occasions. In fact, I'm waiting for them to contact me about one particular script that I'm really happy to work with them on. I mean, I am so happy to work with them. Pankhurst work is great, Nicholas. So if you want me to, like, if you want to talk about the people that I would tell you, and then of course there's my own 5-ish minute lore, but my God. Have I ever talked to Pankhurst Works? Alucris, I've worked with Pankhurst Work. We did the Avatar Kane video together. Vox in the Void, though, Nicholas, if you want to hear some absolutely amazing 40k stories, Vox in the Void is simply put it. Simply put it. Vox in the Void is one of the best storytellers that 40k has to offer, and he has a group of writers that put out some excellent stuff. Anti-Gravity is long shot. Excellent chatting long shot. We didn't need the dad joke. We didn't need that. Nicholas, you see, there's so much, but everybody started somewhere. Everyone started somewhere. Everyone started somewhere. For me, my start into this rabbit hole that was 40k came because of StarCraft and because my friend was talking about Space Marines. What are Space Marines? He started introducing me to that. But it really kicked off. It really kicked off for me when I started reading some books, and then all of a sudden I had my first army, which was the Sisters of Battle Army. In fact, my time in San Diego, when I lived in San Diego with the Sisters of Battle Army, that was the time I was really happy. I was doing a lot of models. I was doing all that other kind of stuff. Michael, you have a great night. But yeah, I spent a lot of time, and you know, you'd be surprised at the amount of people that play a faction and know very little about their lore. You'd be surprised the amount of people that play factions and know excessively little about their lore. They just like painting the models. The hobby is huge. There's so many ways to just get into a hobby. And for me, after because I can't paint models anymore. There's no way I can paint models. I started getting hooked into the lore. I started getting really hooked into the lore then. And the lore has been my way to stay in the hobby and stay enjoying things. And, well, Nicholas, the reason that Warhammer is Chaos and Majesty, like, really, is because there's so much stuff that you can do in it. The lore is just mammothly deep. And there's theory crafting is so heavy for me. And yeah, if you want to know, if you want to check out a couple of things, look down in the description because my lore channel is down there. B-Key is oh, I miss my sister's army. I really, really do. But guys, I'm gonna get ready to get up and get out of here. Thank you all for coming. Thank you all for sitting back and enjoying just some the old Guardsmen party. Just a bunch of people having a lot of fun in it. Oh my God. You're trying to build up your own character for the lore? I found it so funny that so many people started calling me the Commissar early on into this. I thought it was kind of interesting. The Black Templars were my favorite Space Marine chapter. They still are my favorite Space Marine chapter, period, just because Grimaldus. Nicholas, if you really want to check out a series, look up Hell's Reach. Okay? Look up Hell's Reach. Hey, no problem, Eric. No problem, Eric. Oh, heavy weapon. Foxleader, that would be cool. Heavy weapon teams to join the Guardsmen up there on the wall right now, that would be cool. But guys, I'm going to get ready to take off out here. Special thanks to everybody that showed up here tonight. Thank you to, big thanks to the people that sent the super chats. I'm going to head out from here. Seals are good are out. Another chat music's out. I have so much stuff to check out. Nicholas, yes, Vox in the Void. Look up. Nicholas, if you want to know... Oh, wait. Wait, because I'm going to tell you about something, Nicholas. Nicholas, if you want to know how utterly dog water it is, how horrifying it is to be a servitor, the process of becoming a servitor, Vox in the Void, abomination. And do not listen to it around people, because it gets bad very fucking fast. Guys, I'll catch you guys next time. Warpugs, thank you for joining me tonight. I'll see you guys later.
Refurbish gear and steel, warpers on the battlefield, train tracks and iron wheels for the Emperor we wield. Good times rhyme with war crimes, through the ruins and the grime, rolling thunder every time. Warpugs hold the line, for the Emperor we fight. Warpugs in the night, in our tanks we find might. Battle songs that take flight, a regiment fierce and bold, stories of battles told, in the fire and the cold, metal hearts never fold. Rumbling engines roar, echoes of the war, pushing forward more, victory's what we're for. In our armor we unite, day and endless night. With every shot we smite, justice in our sight. Rumbling engines roar, echoes of the war, pushing forward more, victory's what we're for. In our armor we unite, day and endless night. With every shot we smite, justice in our